Here we go. Yeah, almost Friday. But that's good. That's good. Still have to worry about it. Before I forget, let me start that sound a little bit too loud, yappy dog. Let's put you about there. I think that's a little bit better. Maybe adjust my mic a little bit. There we go. That's probably a little bit better. A little bit higher. Oop. All right. Yeah. So today we are going to talk about some one shots. And before I forget, let me send out the tweet, and we'll hang out for a few minutes, see if anybody else shows up. But yeah, sounds like you had a long day too. I know I did. But yeah, no, I'm excited for Friday and excited for the weekend. Got D&D tomorrow, since we didn't have D&D tonight. But that's always nice. So you got that to look forward to. What about you? What's going on with you? You got big weekend plans? Yeah, always a bummer. I was ready for it, but yeah, it is what it is. We'll catch it next time. No big deal. Let's see, let me get a few things sorted. But yeah, hopefully everybody's Memorial Day weekend was well. Yeah, for everybody who celebrates Memorial Day, I guess. So I guess kind of a dour occasion. Yeah, we're gonna have our first in-person session. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm glad to get back to it. I still have Christmas gifts to give out to people that I've been holding on to for half a year. Mm. Yeah, it has been that long. Yeah. The worst part is that I still haven't wrapped the gifts because I didn't know when we were gonna exchange them. So I've just been looking at them. They've just been sitting next to me, and I just look at them all the time, and I'm like, all right, at some point we'll exchange those. So yeah, I'm gonna have to wrap them pretty soon. I have to dig out the old. Maybe it'll be fun. Maybe I'll pull out the old Christmas wrapping and do Christmas wrapping paper for it. That way, it'll seem like I wrapped them in time for Christmas. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. Let me swap over so you guys can all see exactly what I can see. Swap that over real quick. Boop, boop, boop. There we go. Yeah, it kind of stuck up on me. I wanted to get one extra thing for the group for our first in-person session, but I think I've passed the time for shipping on it. I don't think it would get here in time, unfortunately, or else I would definitely use it. So really, this kind of came about, kind of coming up with what I was going to talk about today, based off of two videos that ended up kind of dropping into my feed this week, and I'll pull that up real quick. So the first one is from a channel on YouTube called Bandits Keep. I don't know if you guys have heard of it before. He focuses Daniel primarily focuses on BX D&D, so basic and expert, which is the first 40% of BECMI, which is basic, expert, champions, masters, and immortals, I think. Anyways, it kind of sits in an interesting place during that time period in TSR where they sort of split things off between basic D&D and then advanced D&D, which were kind of two very similar games, but not quite the same game. But a lot of things could be kind of passed back and forward between them. So that's primarily what he focuses on in his videos, and kind of what you can do with it in 5e, or how you can take more contemporary adventures and things from things that are in D&D and other D20 systems and indie RPGs and some non D20 systems, and how you can kind of mix and match and convert that stuff over to run sort of some of the older editions of D&D, which have their own sort of quirks and their own audience depending on what you want. I've played some basic. Uh, there's a lot of things I really like about basic. There's some things that I really don't like about basic. But one of the things that he did, and he talks about it in this video, is talks about prepping for sessions. And as I was watching, I think really basically the first half to maybe 2/3 of it actually focuses on how to start more of a campaign world and sort of set that base for it, sort of building up the world and sort of the basic area. And then what also dropped into my feed this week was this Matt Colville video. For those of you who don't know Matt Colville, I find that surprising. But in case you don't know Matt Colville, if you know anything about sort of D&D and the D&D content creator space, he's in charge of MCDM, and they're making their own RPG right now. But his channel sort of kicked off sort of the initialization for his channel was trying to get more people to run D&D and sort of try to pull away some of the mystery and some of the mystique from what it takes to maybe transition from maybe just playing D&D your first time to running D&D and running like a one shot, then an adventure, and then like an entire campaign in it, and kind of gives you those guides and it's kind of like, sort of behind the screen kind of look at, you know, it seems often seems really daunting from the outside of the DM screen. You're like, I don't understand. Like it seems like so much work, and then he kind of brings you guys sort of behind the screen to kind of give you that idea that actually it's not that difficult. It's a it's a lot of very sort of Wizard of Oz, like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of things. It's like it's really not that difficult, honestly. It seems really difficult until you've done it for the most part. Yeah, exactly. So it's actually, you know, fairly easy. But this one specifically where he talks about prep can be easy and fun. I enjoy prep, so I knew going into it that I was probably going to like what he has to say, and I've watched a lot of his videos. But he kind of focuses on specifically a newbie if you're going to run basically your first game of D&D and you want to make your own adventure rather than run sort of a pre-made adventure or anything like that, and how to do it. And he pretty much just talks about like make it a one shot. I was like, okay. And so that kind of dovetailed into what Daniel was kind of talking about at the latter part in his video, which was about really sort of prepping an initial session for games. And I thought, oh, it'd be cool to kind of talk a little bit about one shots. I mean, we talked about some session prep and in some previous it seems weird to call them episodes, previous streams, I guess is probably the better word. It's just when they're also put up on YouTube, it makes me think episodes. Probably because on the Sunday we're running the solo RPG adventure, and so I think of those in very much in episode sort of turns of sort of game sessions. But for this one, it made me think about one shots. And I was like, oh yeah, I have the one shot that I've been wanting to talk about that I ran a little while ago, which was actually a one-on-one session. I was actually running. I wasn't running D&D. I was running because the person I was running it for was some exposure to some new systems. So I thought, hey, why don't I run? I haven't run this in a long time or played with this. It's Gamma World, which is actually from the fork of the fourth edition of the game. Even though Gamma World's been around for a long time, I think this is technically the fifth edition of Gamma World. But it's built off of the fourth edition of D&D's rules, and it's sort of a very post-apocalyptic, almost like a Mutant Year Zero kind of feel to it, where everybody's kind of weird, mutated creatures, and you could be a person, you could be part cockroach, you could be part robot. It's very weird. It's not really meant to run long campaigns for, but for doing like one shots or sort of like suspended adventures, it works really, really well for it. But it's also incredibly lethal and a little gonzo. It's kind of all over the place. So I can understand it would be really, really difficult to try to run a long term campaign in it. And I think the levels only go up to 10 anyway. So you would have to kind of really slow things down as far as like the experience and how people spend it. Yeah, exactly. It's like breaking a one shot down into um, breaking all of DMing down into a one shot. Very much like distill it into uh, the very basics of what it takes to be a DM, and that's really what I think the Matt Colville video does really well. And what I really enjoyed about it is a very different approach to how I've ever created a one shot. But the fundamentals are still the same for what he has. He's basically, you want to make basically 3 encounters and that's it, and then just kind of figure out how to string them together, and that's really all you need for a one shot. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. So I thought, that was a good video, and then I had Daniel's video that also kind of talks about that and kind of talks about setting up the starter area. And 3 feels like really short encounters, but I have a conversion. We went through my D&D session sheet a while ago that I kind of used to build to plan out to do the prep for individual sessions, but that's more for an ongoing sort of adventure or campaign. But in it, basically, it's broken down. I have it broken down into times with the idea that it basically takes 20 minutes plus the number of PCs, or for each PC, you add an extra 5 minutes to the 20 minutes, and that's about how long it takes to get through an average scene. So if you were doing like our Game World thing, where I was playing basically a sidekick character, just because the system is kind of wonky and could be super lethal, so I wanted to make sure that the friend I was playing with had somebody who could also soak up some damage and do a little attacking and all that good stuff as sort of a sidekick. So I knew that that's 20 plus 2. So I knew it was going to take me about 30 minutes per scene. So if you take that and you depend on how long you're going to play, if you know how long you're going to play, you can kind of figure out about how many scenes you're going to need, which is a really useful tool. And it really keeps you from either way over prepping and way under prepping. Now, it's not perfect. I still over prep quite a bit, especially if I'm running a dungeon. I tend to over prep a lot for dungeons. But the nice thing about over prepping for something like a dungeon is that most parties will go. They'll try to, at least in contemporary D&D, most parties will try to explore every nook and cranny of every dungeon. So if you plan out the whole dungeon ahead of time, you're probably going to use all that content. There's not going to be any content that's going to kind of lost on the cutting room floor. Yes, and of course there's plenty of loot. So yeah, we just kind of use that. So I don't really feel that bad about doing it in dungeon, but I definitely don't want to do that if I'm doing not a dungeon adventure. If I want to plan out a whole bunch of scenes, and also because of the way that characters, and we talked about this in the D&D session prep episode stream, sorry, was that you really only know the first scene. You really only know the start of the session, because depending on what happens in the start of the session and what choices the players make, it could go off in any sort of direction. So you don't really know. So really, your best thing is to kind of spend most of your prep time on that first session, and then try to give your best kind of guesstimate as to where you think they're going to go, depending on whether they succeed or fail on that encounter and whatever their goal is that they're trying to achieve in that first encounter or scene of the game. And once you have that, you kind of improvise, roll with what you have, and try to shift things around and try to make them work. Right? Yeah. No plan, no plan or prep survives contact with your players or the enemy. uh, or there's an Eisenhower quote that I really like for prepping, and that's that prep is useless. I mean, for him, he was talking about battle, so he's like, planning is useless, but the act of planning is incredibly valuable. So most of my prep, right, most of our prep as a DM is sometimes kind of useless, because if they decide to go left when you think they're going to go right, then all that prep's kind of lost. But prepping and thinking about the world and what the characters and the players are going to do will give you the ability to sort of improvise and roll with that, and kind of use the things that you have prepped to kind of make them work, or at least get you to the point where you're going to have enough to sort of improvise to kind of make it through. Because that's another thing that we talked about sort of in the prep stream, is that your basic goal with prep is to make it to the end of the session, at which point you'll get to do prep again for the next session. So if things go off the rails, like in a totally different direction, you just need to be laying out enough tracks in front of the train of your players to get them to the next station, to get them to the end of the session. And then you can turn around and you get to do the whole cycle over again, which is really good. I mean, you'll wipe stuff, you'll get to come up with new stuff, and if you're like me and you enjoy the prep part and you find it fun, then and you learn how to find the fun in prep, which I think is a skill for longtime successful dungeon masters, is that you have to find out, you have to find the points of prep that make you really enjoy it. So if you're a person, so like in this Matt Colville video, he talks a lot about he really enjoys finding a map and then creating an encounter or scene based off of that map. So if you like cool maps, and then yeah, use that as your point of inspiration. And I run mostly theater of the mind, so I don't use a lot of maps. I think about what's going on, and I think about the scenery and stuff like that, but that's not usually my starting point. So you got to find out the things that you like and the situations that you think, the things that kind of get your creative juices going. And if you start off with that and then you let that kind of snowball, then it works out really well. And so what I want to do is I want to show the last that that Gamma World thing that I ran. Yeah, like an anchor point. Yeah, exactly. It's what's going to ground you for your prep, and it's going to keep it from just being a terrible chore all the time. So I wanted to talk about a little bit of this Gamma World duet. This is kind of small. Let me open this up so you guys can see it. Yeah. There we go. That's nice and big. All right, so this was sort of, like I said, this was a duet game. So this was me, one player, and then I also played sort of a DM PC just to kind of give them a little bit more flexibility and functionality as to what they could actually do. Unique guide rails. You suffer from scope creep. Yeah, that's definitely a thing, and I know a lot of DMs suffer from that. Um, one of my good friends, actually, the one who I'm going to play in the game with tomorrow, uh, he can very much get lost in the weeds and sort of world building, and he'll have sort of like this narrative scope about what's going to happen and things like that. And like we just talked about, like no plan survives contact with your players. And we were playing in a different game with a different DM just this last week, and in that game we knew that we were sent on this mission and we were supposed to take care of the city council member. They were very vague as to how we take care of it, just that it was a permanent solution. And so obviously in our minds we're like, oh yeah, we're definitely gonna kill this guy, right? That's the plan. I mean, they heavily implied that we were supposed to kill him. And then we got there and we started talking about it, and I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, I was like, and I started talking to the group, and I was like, we're only thinking about the vinegar options, because the reason is that we were having to deal with him is because he was asking questions about the secret island where like our party's organization is based, and we're like, we got to get attention away from that. And they're like, this guy's asking too many questions. He's raising a lot of suspicion about what's going on, and we're trying to protect our secret base. And so I thought, oh yeah, well, but we're only looking at like the vinegar solutions to that problem. But we could also use the honey solution to that problem. If we can just manufacture a situation in which that city council member literally hires us to go check out the secret island that we already know everything about, we can just go chill out for 2 weeks, come back, and make up whatever we want about that island. And I could see we're talking, and I kind of turned to look at DM, and some other players did too. And we just look at the DM like kind of wide eyed, like, I was not expecting you guys to not kill this guy. It's like, yeah, I mean, we're probably going to kill him, but it was an option, right? It's an option. It still is an option. We haven't resolved that yet. We're still, trying to figure out what we're going to do with that. But the idea is that if you plan for people to kill the PC, or you expect them to do something. Like there is such a high percentage that your player's going to be like, yeah, but actually, I think I'm going to come up with an even totally different idea and use that instead. And you're going to be like, I was not thinking about that. But let's jump back into the duet one shot. So this is one shot. The premise is that it's late autumn, and so Gamma was a little bit different because it's a post-apocalyptic setting with all the mutants and you know A bombs and mutations and all that good stuff, and all this sort of weird tech that's going on. There's like alien technology and things like that. And so I was like, okay, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go grab a real life location and use that, which probably would have been easier if I didn't. I probably added to my prep time. So I just kind of figured out, I don't know. Like I've got some players that are from different parts of the U.S. and I didn't want to pick something that they were going to be intimately familiar with, but I kind of know generally where they grew up, but I don't know where they traveled to. And so I was like, okay. I'm like, all right. And I got in my idea. I think probably based off of work, dealing with people at work. I was like, maybe I'll do something with like a dam and a reservoir. That seems fun because water's a pretty big commodity, right? Obviously in a post-apocalyptic world. So I was like, okay. And so I picked this place near Osaka, which is in Idaho. I was like, I'm pretty sure. I know none of them are from Idaho, and I highly doubt that they went to this random rural area of Idaho. So I'm like, okay, so there's a dam there, there's a reservoir, there are a couple of small towns around. So I start pulling in things like Google Maps it and start pulling things in and be like, okay. And then kind of come up with a basic premise. And I was like, all right, it's kind of the kickoff is just going to be they're going to go to a place and deliver some stuff. That's a pretty easy way because I don't want to spend a lot of time in the beginning, which I think is really, really important with the one shot. You want to get them in, you got to get the players into the action quick. You, especially for a one shot, we're going to have a very limited amount of time. And the idea is you aren't probably going to play these player characters for very long. Probably just this one session. So I don't want to do the whole you meet in a tavern and then we end up spending 30 minutes for people to sort of like awkwardly group up for adventure. Be like, no, you guys are together. You're here. You're doing this thing. It's your job. You're part of this community. So that's why what I did is we put it. So that's down at the back. So they had a community at a place called Fish and Eggs. That's the name of the place that they live. And they're supposed to take salted steelhead and pickled eggs for trade upland to another group that lives nearby. They're going to just trade it. So up to trading upland to a place called Edirek, Grin, which is a Grin camp, which are these different people that are kind of like humans but not quite humans, and they're very anti-technology. And then I just kind of like screwed up the names a little bit, so instead of Dwarshak, it's just Dorshak Highwalla. So it's just Dwarshak High Water. Instead, it's just Dwarshak Highwalla. And then I wanted to set it up so because the Grin are very anti-technology, and the player characters are mutants, and they definitely have old world technology and maybe alien technology. You don't know. It uses here. Let me grab it. So the game uses a deck of cards that does like mutations and technology that you kind of draw, and you make a deck and you kind of move things around. So I didn't know exactly what the PCs were going to have, but there's a high likelihood. Well, I knew for sure they were definitely going to have technology, and the Grin do not like technology. So I wanted to give them enough time. So I was going to have them rest, sort of partway that because it's kind of a day trip. It's just far enough that like if you were walking and you were pulling like a cart or something, that would take you the better part of a day along just kind of a crappy trail head to kind of get all the way up there. So it's like, so the idea is that they will go most of the way, they'll camp, so that way they can reach the camp, do the trade, and leave so they don't have to rest there overnight. Because the idea is that the longer they stay in the Grin camp, the higher the likelihood is that one of the Grin's going to come across their hidden technology stuff that they're going to have to hide when they get there. So that's sort of the setup, and that was all the basic encounter. So then we kind of see we'll jump into these encounters, which is sort of the bolded subheadings we have here. So the first thing is like nothing really happens on most of the first day. So they get about, I think it's about halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way up, and because it's going up to a reservoir, it's all uphill that they're traveling. And they have a horse because I made I hadn't, like I said, I hadn't played Game World in a while, so I made my PC first before I showed up to the game, just so I was familiar with how to make the character, so I could kind of push him through the character creation very quickly. And one of the random items, because you roll for like random gear and supplies that you have, and one of the things that I ended up rolling up was a horse, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll have a horse that, like drives the cart. I guess pulls the cart. I guess that makes sense. So we're resting the horse, and we take a camp, and it's a dark camp, so it kind of makes sure that kind of talk with the player, and like you guys have you're familiar with the area. This is a very local area. You've lived here, and I think I said the way I'd set it up is that both of the characters were assumed to have lived here for about a year, maybe 2 years. They spent probably one winter, maybe 2 winters there at Fish and Eggs. So I set it up that way, and so they know that they need to set a dark camp. They don't want to have any light because that'll attract batters or porkers, who are raiders that are in the area. Batters are basically humanoid badgers, and porkers are, as you might guess, humanoid pig people. Um, or the Hoop Enclave, and Hoops are rabbit people. And so the Hoop Enclave is actually on the other side of the river because they're going up alongside a river up to the reservoir. So we set the dark camp, and while they're in camp, they're going to get attacked by what are called soul meshes, which are just basically giant mutated mosquitoes that are basically the size of people. I think they're medium-sized creatures, so they're about the size of people. So obviously for them, and then this is a really useful thing to do whenever you're prepping, or I found it really useful, is to set a goal. Set a goal for the encounter, for the scene. And that goal usually is not kill all the bad guys. Or at least if you want to have, I feel like, more dynamic encounters. Yeah, classic Death Mosquitoes. Exactly. I made them as terrifying as I possibly could. They were very gross. They attacked the horse. They were like riding the horse, and I was like, you could kind of see like the gulps of blood kind of like coming up the proboscis. It was a lot of fun. So they're basically, their point is of the goal is not necessarily to kill the soul beshes or the big mosquitoes, is to protect the horse because they need the horse to pull the cart, or else they're not going to be able to deliver the supplies because they've got a whole bunch of supplies in like 55-gallon drums that they've got to get up there. Yeah. And right, it's one of the PC's horses. We had talked about it before. I had the player name the horse instead of me, so that there was already a little bit of a tie to it. But at the same time, they also don't want to make as much noise, because if they make too much noise, then some of the raiders might show up during the night. Yeah, and a little bit cruel. I mean, it's a one shot, so you kind of have to like dovetail it in real quick. You don't have a lot of time to like organically build that sort of relationship between a PC and NPC and just be like, no, it's your horse, you named it, and it's your job to protect it. And also, you just need to protect it to complete your mission. So yeah, so we went through that. We were able to get the soul beshes off. It wasn't too bad. We did end up having to discharge firearms, so I had to make some wandering monster rolls to see if somebody was going to show up, and we ended up succeeding on that. So none of the bad guys showed up, but I did definitely, and part of this was telegraphing one of the next encounters, was that you guys could hear in the distance, and you could see lights filtering through the trees somewhere far off. It's like you can hear motorcycles like moving around in the distance, and you can see like the faint whispers of like headlights from them in the darkness. So they knew that there were porkers, and they knew specifically that was porkers, and they were out there, and they were nearby. But they get through the night just fine. They go up to the next time, and I wanted to set up so because I'm using an actual map of the area, and this is basically an actual like recreational trail that like people use for hiking and stuff. And Eddie Rec is actually a recreation center, and that's where the wreck from Eddie Rec comes from, the place they're going to. It's a recreation center that's on the shoreline of the lake. So, but at this, there's a trail fork that happens, and you can either take one fork that kind of leads you to the recreation center, or you can take this other one that peels off and goes towards an old strip mine. So I was like, all right, so there's gonna be this fork in the road, but I want them because they're not really, they'll have an idea, and both of those trails end up going like meeting back up at the recreation center. It just kind of makes kind of a big circle. But one way is definitely faster. And so, all right, well, if that way's faster, then I need to make the other way potentially safer. But it also has to be like I want them to have a meaningful choice there. So I was like, all right, well, what I'll do is I'll drop a. So there are robots. There are like combat robots in the book. That are some of the bad guys. So I was like, all right, I'll throw a book in there, or a bot in there. And so this one is a USACE Walla Walla uh, robot that's still functioning, that's patrolling the trail. So it's a United States Army Corps of Engineering Walla Walla region, because that's the region that um, takes of the Army Corps of Engineers that takes over that area. It's in charge of that area. So they just kind of call them Walla Wallas, right? Because they have no clue what USACE stands for. But there's a bot that's patrolling the trail, and I was like, you guys know enough about living in this area that this is one of the smaller. This is like a sentry robot. It's like you can probably, if you guys attack it, you guys can probably kill it, or dismantle it. I guess you can't really kill a robot. But there's a high likelihood that it will raise an alarm, and if it raises an alarm, like legitimate combat robots are probably going to show up. And those things, the two of you with like your hunting rifles probably can't kill. Will probably destroy you very easily. They're and those are also in the book. But I was like, these are a much higher CR monster that's going to show up if you screw this up. So it's like you can either try to sneak around it and go that way. You can attack and take it out, or you can maybe take the side path off through the strip mine. But if you do that, that's going to take you closer to where the porkers are that you saw the night before. And if you take that long about, that means you're probably going to need to rest again out before you get there, or you're going to have to rest once you actually get to the recreation center. And if you do that, right, there's a higher chance that your old world tech is going to be discovered, right? And that's bad for you because then you're going to be in the middle of a hostile village. Right, yeah. The idea is to have meaningful choices, and one of the things I think is really, really, um, really a necessity for being a very good DM, especially when you're going to present choices for the players, is make sure they have the information to make knowledgeable choices, right? I was going to say smart choices, but there's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's just whatever you do. And so, I mean, that's a good thing for them to your players to kind of discuss back and forth. Okay, well, I'm pretty good at stealth. How are you at stealth? Oh, you suck at stealth. So, I mean, we could try to sneak around this robot, but the likelihood is that there's a high chance that maybe you'll get caught. And then we're going to be in a fight anyways. We could try to jump it and try to kill it before it reports anything. But if we don't kill it outright, it's probably going to radio back or whatever communication it uses to bring out the big combat drones. And if the combat drones show up, then I can't do anything about that. They're probably going to chase us through the forest and probably kill us. Yeah, it's all about providing context, and making sure. And one thing that sometimes I do as a DM is try to ask questions to the players, be like, is there anything you're unsure about? Is there something that you want to know more information about? And that can be skill rolls if they want to make skill rolls, or if they need clarifications about something. Like, I want them to ask me as many questions as they feel like they need to be able to make a pretty informed choice. But at some point, they're going to have to make an informed choice. And the truth is that probably through and around this second scene was probably um, the scene that took almost the most amount of time. I think the next one, the negotiations with the Grim, probably took the most amount of time. And that's what I find is that things like this, where you force the players into a position where they're going to need to make a decision, that's when the game tends to slow down. I mean, other than combat, but most of these combats were small, so they didn't take too long because we only have 2 players, so we can't have particularly large combats. So then the combats were pretty snappy. But if And the great thing about doing that is that as a DM, you can just kind of sit back, or I would if I wasn't also playing the sidekick. As a sidekick, I was able to sort of prompt the player with extra information or give them as much context. But in the end, right, they're the player; they have to make the decision. But they can look. I let them look at my character sheet if they want to see my sheet. They can ask my character questions, uh, but I made sure that I set it up in a way that these characters have been in the community for about as long as each other, so there's no piece of information that my character would have that his character would not have access to, which I thought was really important. Make sure that, like, I'm not trying to hide anything from you. This is a decision you have to make, and you can ask for my character's input, and he'll give his input based off of his strengths and weaknesses. But it's not there is no right decision. It's just whatever you want to try, right? So they ended up going around. They ended up deciding to go around. So they took the long way around to the strip mine, and as they were getting close to the strip mine, I let them know that, like, you can definitely hear motorcycles now as you get closer and closer. And as they got closer, and they kind of reached the tree line, I was like, okay, you see the old strip mine, and you see that the porkers are basically using dirt bikes to just screw around, and they're drinking beer on the side and playing the radio real loud and just kind of being delinquents. They're basically teenagers, but big pig guys. Yeah, they're they definitely felt like they probably belong. I get an idea that that's probably what happens in that abandoned strip mine, anyways, just with real people. Yeah, absolutely, blasting some classic rock, some definitely some old, nice like '70s prog and classic rock. Um, or maybe some hard rock, maybe some Sabbath, something like that. Little Deep Purple, that sort of stuff. So I had them do a little skill challenge. So I had them do, yeah, War Pigs. Yeah, that may be a little too on the nose. And War Pigs is, for the most part, kind of a slow song. So I had them get to the point. It's like, all right, there's gonna be a skill challenge because you guys basically tried to sneak around the robot, which was successful. But now you guys also have to sneak around these porkers who aren't paying particular attention, but you do have a horse and cart with you, and you're gonna have to walk. Not, you're basically on the other side of the strip mine from them. So there's plenty of eyesight. There's a relatively clear line of sight if you're, but as long as you guys are quiet and you don't get too far out of the trees, they shouldn't see you. So I kind of ratcheted up the tension there, and they realized that something was going on, but they weren't able to pinpoint it. And so I think, if I remember correctly, I think they decided they were going to check it out. And at that point, basically, they were like getting their things together, getting back on their motorcycles, and at that point, we were basically exiting the scene, and we're like, all right, well, we just kind of start booking it. We start running as soon as we're sure that they can't see us anymore. And then they're not going to hear anything over the motorcycles, so it didn't really matter. So we ended up skirting around that without a combat. So as you can tell, this I tried to balance this one shot so it had kind of everything in it. It kind of hit all the pillars, right? There's a little bit of exploration, investigation, right? They could choose to do the fight with the bot, or they could not. They had a combat with the soul beshes with the big mosquitoes, and then they get to the Grin camp, and then I basically set it up as sort of a skill challenge again, which is something that's kind of pulled over from the fourth edition of D&D. But I use it sometimes in fifth edition, different things, and it's basically, best 3 out of 5. If you do it and you beat the DCs on most of the things, then you're successful. But you also have to RP it out. So it's like, how do you do it? So they talk with the Grin. They talk with the Grin leaders. There's sort of a little celebration that kind of goes on. They have to sort of win over the Grin. They have to do a good job of hiding their weapons and technologies, so those aren't found out. And sort of as this negotiation sort of winds down a little bit, is when we kind of jump immediately dovetail sort of into this next scene, which is basically there is an advanced hoop scout that they recognize, and then they in the Grin get to kind of sort of tag team and try to kill a few hoops, and they're able to capture this one hoop scout alive. And they try to interrogate it, and of course the hoop, they didn't roll particularly good on some of their sort of charisma skills, so they barely got any information out of him. Basically enough to know that the hoops were basically from the DM's perspective, all I want to do with this is to, right, they want to escape with the payment. That's basically the goal of this scene for the players. But they also want to learn what they're going to learn from the hoop scout is that there's an attack coming, and that attack does start to happen at the Grin compound. But they learn from the hoop scout that that's not the only attack that's happening. Is that they are also planning to hit fish and eggs, and so they need to get back to fish and eggs as soon as possible to sort of protect their community, right? And they have normally they would have time, but since they went the long way around, they didn't really have time. They needed to leave like immediately, so they talked with the Grin, and I think they attempted to get some of the Grin warriors to come with them. I think the Grin warriors pretty much told them no. Again, they did really poorly with their their charisma skill checks. They didn't do a very good job, and then like they were getting attacked themselves. Oh yeah, definitely check out the VOD later. We'll have it up. It'll also be up on YouTube. But good night. Have a good one. So in addition, at the basically they were like, we got to get home quickly. All right. So what's the fastest way to get home from the reservoir? Because taking the trail, like I said, it takes the better part of a day to get from Eddie Wreck and Fish and Eggs. In between those two, it's the better part of a day. So they're running behind schedule. They don't have enough time to get there by foot, and so they're on the reservoir. Well, the Grin definitely have canoes. So they're like, we can take a canoe, but the problem is that we've got to get it down river from the reservoir, and there's kind of a big dam in the way. So what they try to do is we set up a thing where they was like, all right, well we'll open the floodgates a little bit, the spillway a little bit on the dam, and we'll ride that along with the inertia that comes with that dammed up water, and that'll help speed us sort of back down the river. Now, we're like, also there's a gigantic drop there. I forgot how long it is. I think it was either somewhere between 30 and 50 feet. And I'm like, it's a really dangerous drop. Like, this is a really dangerous plan. It's a good plan, but it's incredibly dangerous. But thankfully, my other player had one of the mutations, and one of their powers. I'm not going to search for it in the deck, but one of their powers basically allows them to kind of make a stasis protection bubble. And so what they did is they were like, okay, we're going off. We hit down. We go over the spillway, and the canoe kind of noses down, and you guys start falling. And the player characters are like holding on to the canoe, this dugout canoe, for dear life. They're screaming as they're flying down. And then the player is like, all right, well, I use my little stasis bubble right before we hit the water, so that way it'll slow us down and protect us. I was like, yeah, absolutely, that's a great use of it. That's not really how the power is supposed to be used, but I really like the creative use of it, so we're gonna use that, and I think it's gonna work for sure. So then, yeah, the final danger is them basically getting back, and the final danger is right when they talk about in. I can't remember if we talked. I don't think we've talked about it in adventure design yet. But what we talk about sometimes with the final danger is basically what happens after what we might consider sort of the climax of it. Now, the way this ended up working is that actually the final danger actually really ended up being the climax. I also kind of had to speed things up because we were running a little bit behind schedule. So what we did is that we ended up not dealing with the bridge because we were going so fast because of the water. We kind of missed all the shots we took at the hoops on the bridge that are trying. So the bridge dovetails right into fish and eggs, like that's how it's set up on the map. And fish and eggs, by the way, is a fish and wildlife like fish hatchery. Like it's an old fish hatchery for fish and wildlife, and so that's why they have it there, right? That's why they have the fish there, and then they kept some chickens there, and so they trade fish and they trade eggs. And so I thought that would be a fun thing, and that would make it a very useful and very desirable location. And clearly, the Hoop, which are the big rabbit people, they definitely want this location. And then, like, this is certainly not the first attack that's happened there. And the Hoop actually are based out of. We have it down here. I thought I had it down here. Yeah, I don't have it. Anyways, the Hoop are based out of, I think, the water treatment plant that's on the west side of the river, so they're relatively close by. But they have to come across the bridge, and the only bridge goes through fish and eggs, so that kind of keeps them on that far side of the river for the most part. But one of the ways that I set this up here is that at the confluence, because there's actually right where fish and eggs is right at the confluence of two rivers where they come together. And right after they come together, there's a little island that's been built out of sediment from the river naturally. I was like, okay, well, they have found out a way to get this. They have basically used an old piece of I think I said a backhoe, an old piece of like construction machinery, and they've turned it into sort of a pneumatic catapult that they're like flinging probably like 55-gallon barrels full of like sand or rocks or stuff at fish and eggs, trying to break down the gate and just cause general mayhem. And so that was one of the things that they had to stop. And so that was one of their big goals. So they didn't really do goal one because they ended up flying right past it. And so their second goal was to take out the catapult. And I was like, actually, you guys have so much. And again, we were running behind schedule, so I'm trying to wrap it up pretty quickly. I was like, you guys have so much water coming from behind you that they ended up just abandoning the canoe and just let this tidal wave of water that's rushing down the river just wash over the island and just absolutely take out the catapult all by itself. I think I think the player had a new power that did something with that helped that, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. And I ran this a little while ago. It's been a few weeks. It's been more than weeks. It's been a few months, honestly, since I've ran this. But it's the last time I ran a one shot, so I wanted to use it. And this is just kind of the first time I got around to it. And I have another one shot that I had ready to run for the same group, well, the same player in a larger group, but people ended up kind of dropping out on that in the last minute, so we didn't end up getting to do it. But I'm hoping, I don't want to talk about that because my hope is that next time that we have an opportunity to do it, that I'll actually get an opportunity to run it. And it's Savage Worlds, which I really want to show off. If you guys haven't played Savage Worlds, I highly recommend it. If you want to see what it kind of plays like and how it's a little bit different, uh, check out the YouTube channel Me, Myself, and Die, and he does solo RPG adventures. And the very first season, he uses Savage Worlds in a fantasy setting. Savage Worlds is a very universal, generic kind of role playing game, so you can use it in a bunch of different genres, which is why I like it. It's like if I just need something, if I want to run a space game, which is what this one shot is, and I was like, I don't really want to try to teach people Starfinder or something like that just to run like a one shot. So it's like Savage Worlds works pretty easily, and it's pretty easy to teach. The teach for it is relatively simple, but that's the next one shot that I'll run. So that kind of cleared it up. So that was basically the one shot. So as you can see, this is about one page. Like that's really all you need for it. I had the book, and the book's got all the stat blocks for all the bad guys in it. So I didn't really need anything else other than that. We took some extra time here. I don't know if you guys can see it. Let me see if I can get this close enough. This has you can see sort of the big wrong side, the big combat drone up here. That would have been one of the nasty ones, and then across from it, right there, is the Sentry bot for Walla Walla. But yeah, you know, it was fun. He enjoyed it. Got to see a new system. Like I said, it wasn't it was kind of a one and done kind of thing, and that was sort of the intention. I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But you can see that even this, which only has let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, technically 6, has 6 encounters for just 2 people to play in. And I ran out of time, and we played for, well, we took kind of a break in the middle, I should say. But we definitely played for 3 hours, maybe a little over 3 hours. So yeah, you can see that, you know, it seems like it won't take very much time, but players take forever to do stuff. And then there's a lot of questions, there's back and forth, and there's the general sort of screwing around, or people need to get up and get a drink or get a snack or use the bathroom and stuff. Like, the game always takes longer, I feel, than you think it is. Because I remember making this and looking at it and being like, it's not a lot. Like, there's not a lot here. And it was also a little bit slower because it was my first time playing it in many, many years. And it was his first time playing it at all. And so I had to remember how Gamma World works and how 4th edition D&D works, because I certainly haven't played that since 5th edition came out, I think. Certainly since it came out officially. Mostly since it... we pretty much stopped playing 4th edition, I guess, with the group I was with. No, we did the playtest material for 5e. And we did a number of sessions with that, with the different packets as they came out. And we did play a little bit of 4th edition through that. But certainly by the time before 5th edition was fully out, we had basically stopped playing 4th edition. Which is a shame. I think it's a really great system. I think 4th edition is a lot of fun for a very specific type of game. It is very tactical combat. It is very much tuned to that. So if you enjoy tactical combat and you like having a lot of different powers and things like that, and you're not hung up on what is and what is not technically D&D, if you're not worried about that, then I think it's a really good system. It's definitely a system that I feel like would have been, and I think a lot of people say this, the game would have been more successful if you had just scrubbed off the D&D label on it. If it was its own standalone thing, it probably would have done a lot better. But because it had to fly under the D&D flag, it has all that old build-up, all that sediment aggregate of the older editions of D&D and what D&D is and what it is not. And the same thing happens in what they call, the edition wars between editions. It was like, oh, it's not my game, blah, 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 blah. But it's a fun game. It does one thing really good. Actually, it does a number of things really, really well. And does a lot of things significantly better than 5e, even though a significant portion of 5e's bones are built off of 4e. It's just for people who didn't play 4E, that is, they don't see that. So if you're, but coming from somebody who played basically fourth edition through its entire lifespan, like I can see the stuff that made its way into 5e and the stuff they kept and the stuff they dropped. One thing I will say about fourth edition is that from a DM perspective, it's a much easier game to prep for, and it does a much better job of giving the DM resources to do that prep and teaching them how to do that. For my money, it's probably the best. It probably has the best PHP and DMG as far as teaching people through a book how to play the game. Because the fifth edition, especially the DMG, just does not do a good job of that. It just really doesn't. Which is, my own problems with it. And one reason why I don't actually use the 5e DMG very much, because I don't find it that useful. But that is what it is. But I thought we'd also look at. We talked a lot about what goes into it, but let's it's what 9:15. 9:15 for me, anyways. I don't know what time it is for you guys, but for me right now. So I think let's maybe make a one shot. So one of the things that I liked, sort of, that I think works really well to dovetail between sort of the Bandits Keep episode or video that I watched and the Matt Colville video to watch. So I think that that's a great way to start an ongoing campaign, is with a one shot. And that might sound weird. Because usually when you prep a one shot, you're like, we're going to play these characters. This is the only time we're going to play them. So it doesn't really matter about their party dynamics and all that stuff. And you definitely want to have a session 0 if you're planning to continue on. If you're planning to run a campaign. And I don't think it's usually very successful to run a one shot and then try to turn a one shot into an ongoing campaign if you weren't planning from that on the outset, because it's really hard to try to keep those player characters together, because they were all probably built separately and really have nothing to do. They have no reason to be together, and they're not built with a cohesive setting in mind. So it can be really difficult to turn that. But I think it's one shots are probably one of the best ways to actually start. And it's definitely it just is my favorite way to start a campaign. Is to set the players off with an idea, like do the session 0, have everybody make characters, have some world setting details, just to kind of get them an idea about. So that way you have an idea of the game that they want to play. And so get all that sort of background info, and then make a one shot, and then so you can kind of skip the whole we all meet in the tavern awkwardly, kind of halfway talk to each other and agree to be adventurers together with a bunch of strangers you just met and have known for like an hour, and getting a job off of some shady dude in the corner of an inn. Instead, just being like, you guys start at the entrance of the dungeon, you got a map, you kind of know each other. You use that. That's one of the things I want to do with the session 0 is like, okay, what connection does your character and your character have, and kind of do that. So they kind of build a relationship already. So it's not weird that there's a bunch of people showing up that don't know anything about each other. Getting away something that kind of glues the characters together right off the bat is really important. And so having something that can be one thing, or that can be just sort of a few different relationships between different PCs, sort of like a group that's full of kind of acquaintances. Like, I'm sure we've all had those sort of like in real life experience where you get invited by a friend to, whether it's like a wedding or a bachelor party, or just like it can be a D&D game. That's definitely happened with me, where you get invited from somebody that you know, but you don't know anybody else, but the person that invited you knows one or maybe more of the other people, and so you guys kind of have a tenuous relationship together, like you kind of understand the group dynamics a little bit. And it's much easier to sort of keep the group together when at least some of the pieces are glued. But I like to kind of do the background, then do the one shot, and then have the one shot, the end of the one shot, basically have them dropped off into the sandbox with kind of some story beats for what they want to do next. But that's because I run a little bit more of a sandbox style. But I want them to have an adventure, get the adventure done, and then at the conclusion of the adventure, they're in the inn for whatever the local haven or settlement is, and then from there I could start giving them ideas about other adventures to do sort of in the area, and they can kind of pick and choose, and then kind of let the campaign organically build from there instead of trying to do that in the very beginning. Like, go ahead and get them together, go ahead and give them time to sort of figure out how to play together and how these characters interact, and then kind of introduce them to the world and have them, take charge and decide what they want to do. But I feel like it can be really hard, and I've definitely felt that as a player. If you get started off in a campaign and be like, "What do you want to do?" It's like, I don't know. I barely know this character any more than the numbers that are on the page, and I certainly don't know any of these other player characters, even though I've probably played with these players for many months or years or whatever. But I don't know these characters, and I don't know how this party interacts. So I like to figure that out first, which you can do through an initial adventure, like a one shot, even a two shot or a three shot. But I feel like a one shot does it really well, because that'll give you enough information as a DM that I can kind of understand their play style and kind of the party's strengths and their weaknesses, and kind of get that information, the sort of information you can only get through play, and then use that to be able to sort of build the world around the group. But I thought we could build a little adventure real quick. I've got this saved, so I don't even need to worry about it. So let's build a one shot real quick. So let's say let's do our standard. We're gonna do a D&D 5e one shot, D&D 5e, and let's say we're gonna have four PCs. That's nice and easy to plan for. So we know. So if we talked about how long are we gonna play? Let's say the groups I usually play with, we usually play relatively longer sessions. But the average session's sort of in that 3 to 4 hour thing. So let's say somewhere in 3 to 4 hours. 3 to 4 hours. So that's kind of our time frame. So we talked about in the session sheet that you got 20 minutes. So it's 20 minutes plus 5 minutes per PC, which is another 20 minutes because we got 4 PCs. So we know using that a scene is about 40 minutes, which is about right. Some scenes go faster, some go slower. So if you're ever, and I talked about this in the session prep video, if you ever feel like I don't have enough for the session, prep one more scene. Prep one more optional scene. If you need it, great. If you don't need it, it's fine. Throw it away. But if you're worried about it, prep one more scene. If you don't feel like you have enough. All right, 40 minutes. So we do some quick math. So it's 40. So what? That probably gives us what, like 5 encounters, right? It's getting late. My brain's all mathed out from today. Well, 3 scenes would be 80 plus 120. All right, so 3 scenes is 2 hours. So yeah, somewhere between 5 and 6 scenes. So that means, right, we need between 5 and 6 scenes. So again, if we wanted to err on the side of caution, I'd just prep 6 scenes. 1, 2, 3, 4, scene 6. All right. And you know what? I'm gonna put some question marks around here because depending on what we end up coming up with, we might not use scene 6. Here, we'll just do that. All right. So one of the things that I think is really useful is that if you're going to make an adventure, especially if you've been doing this for a while, you probably have some resources. You probably have some Dungeon Master or Game Master resources. So use them. And I think I really like Trevor DeVal's advice that he talks about in sort of his solo RPG prep and play. Where he talks about it's, especially if you've been playing RPGs for a while, you'll end up with a lot of books. You'll end up with a lot of resources. And there's a sort of natural inclination to use all of them. Well, don't do that. Don't do that because you'll spend for all your time looking up stuff in books and switching between things, and you'll have a stack of things on your desk or kitchen table or wherever you're prepping, and you'll spend most of your time looking stuff up in the book and very little time actually prepping. So we want to prep, not think about prepping. So I figured I'd grab a few resources that I want to show. I'm going to show off more resources I think than usual, just because, just kind of give you an idea of what I use and what sort of different resources are out there, and then you can kind of choose. But I'd really like, if I was going to do this in real life. I mean, I'm doing it in real life, but if I was doing it for actual prep purposes, I would probably pick like 2 or 3 sources and just use those. I think would probably be my go-to. I don't think that I try to avoid using any more than that. Or like I said, you're going to end up with them a whole bunch of time. So we know that we're going to prep about 5 or 6 scenes, and we're going to make an adventure. So one of the things that we want to do, and I think probably the easiest way, I've got some stuff pulled up already, so let's look at that. Oh, that's right, I have this up, and I was going to do this in this document, but I didn't. All right, so one of the things I want to pull up, let's look up. Let's look at this, guys. So this is one of the resources that I really like. I've talked about this before. I'm trying to see if my hardback copy, I have placed it somewhere, and I'm not sure where. It's really good. Oh, there it is. Talked about it before. This is the first edition of the Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide. I think, and a lot of people echo its praise. I think it's probably one of the best Game Master books that you can have. There's a lot of good information here about how to run the game and how to set up the game. And even though I don't think I've ever actually run Pathfinder first edition. I played a lot of it, but I don't think I've ever actually run it. But anything that's in here can be transposed to just about any tabletop RPG game that you're going to run or play. Obviously, the DCs aren't going to be the same, the monsters aren't going to be the same necessarily, and the CRs and all the math's not going to be the same, but the ideas about what's important about running and those sort of things, those are pretty evergreen, and they work across all systems. And this is one of the really good resources that kind of tells you about some basic ideas about how to do it. Also, this is the digest size, the sort of small size softback copy, which is incredibly affordable. I think I actually got this on sale. I think it retails normally for $20, and I think I got it on sale for $15 or $16. And it's around here somewhere. I got the one for Starfinder as well. Because the truth is that otherwise, they're like this size. And these books are great. I like big hardbound books, but they're like school textbooks. And they're kind of cumbersome. Hey there, how are you doing? You having a good evening? We're doing one-shot prep, talking about some one-shot stuff for D&D. But I really enjoy this sort of like smaller size. This is a much better form factor for me. I can throw it in my game bag. I don't worry too much about it. And if I lose it or if it gets all screwed up, it's, somewhere between $15 to $20 to replace instead of like $50 to $70, which I like that a lot more. Yeah, I am a DM. I am a player and a DM, but this one we're talking about one shot prep and kind of setting up one shot, so it's definitely kind of coming from that dungeon master perspective. So yeah, I mean, this is a really good form factor to do it in. Another one that I really like, and this one we're definitely going to be using today, is the Lazy DM's Companion. The Lazy DM's, or Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, or the Lazy DM, is probably one of the best game master supplements available. It's really great. For, again, it's another sort of neutral resource that's really good for anybody who's running. It's a really good introduction into sort of game master craft or running games. But this one is the DM's Companion, which basically has a bunch of, I mean, it's mostly tables to help you sort of set up things. So I think this is a really good one because it has this section very specifically on one shots. So let's take a look at what they have for one shots. And I thought I had the PDF loaded up, but I realized I don't have it. I need to go back in and download it because apparently I didn't save the PDF version because I just have the printed version, which I need to change. And the nice thing is that one shots are pretty early on in here. Session 0, 1-on-1 games. There we go. Running a single session game is what they call what Mike Shea calls it. Talks about doing an entire arc in about 4 hours. Yeah, I mean that's understandable. I mean D&D takes a while to play. I mean we just talked about sort of a 4 hour session. It's kind of hard to block that time out, especially trying to coordinate multiple people to try to do it all at the same time. Plus, if you're a game master, you're going to have to do some extra work outside of it, which is what we're talking about right here. But totally understandable. It's definitely something that I've come in and out of through my career, and now I'm very much into it. But there was definitely a time where I didn't have a lot of time, or even knew a lot of people who wanted to play. But now I'm back into it, and I really love it, and I really enjoy it, and I like to share it with people. So if you like to listen to me talk, I like to talk. So we'll go with that. So what we have here is that it talks about trying to do an entire arc in 4 hours, and he has a few bullet points here. So a strong start, and that's one of the things. That's probably the most reoccurring thing that happens in the Lazy DM is that he talks about having how important it is to have a strong start, which is what I was talking about earlier. Is that we don't want to have a whole bunch of time at the beginning of the session where our players are sort of milling around, not sure what to do. We kind of want to get them into the action like real quick, so they're doing stuff. So the scene one, we're gonna know the scene one's definitely gonna be our strong start. Let's do that. So our strong start. So we want to get them into the action. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Ask all the questions you want. Yeah, actually, I have two different groups that I play with. One group I usually play with on Thursdays. Usually, we'd be wrapping up about now or just having wrapped up, but we ended up having to cancel the session. One of our players couldn't make it, so I was like, I'll jump on the stream and talk about some stuff. And then the other group I play with is on Fridays, and I'll play with them tomorrow. I mean, unless they cancel, but hopefully they don't. Fingers crossed. So we went the strong start. How does the session begin, and how are the characters thrown into the adventure? Uh, Coming with that is what he calls a solid hook, and that's something we need here. So what's the hook? So that's what we want. We want an adventure hook. What are they going to? I mean, primarily it's what's going on. Why should they care? What is their motivation as player characters? So we'll put that as player character. So PC motivation. One good thing to do if you're running an ongoing campaign is to try to make it personal. Try to make the adventure personally tied to at least one of the characters, so they're not. So it's not always motivated by sort of material gain, but for a one shot, that's going to work perfect for us. We're not going to know enough about the characters, especially if we haven't done session 0. We're not going to know what motivates those characters. So we're going to have some sort of material. Well. So we know what their motivation is going to be for this for a one shot. We don't really have to worry about the two. It could be material wealth, or it could be a magic item. Could be. That's always a really good one, and it's nice to kind of get that out in the first sort of adventure, especially if they're for new players. To be like, oh, you get this cool shiny item you can use if you come back to play next time. I do not stream with them. No, both of my groups are offline. Some of my players and people I play with do stream. We just don't stream D&D together. They mainly stream video games, I think. Yeah, no, I don't. I don't stream with the groups. We have in the previous group I played with, we did record sessions and put them out in sort of a podcast variety, but we don't stream together. Especially playing all in person, like the amount of cameras and all that stuff that we would need to set it up, like it's a pretty intense. Oh, thanks for the follow. Yeah, it's pretty intense setup to try to get that multi-camera setup. That's really what you need to. I feel like to have the right production value for doing, especially an in-person stream. And we play in person. We don't play over Discord or Zoom or anything like that. So we want a clear goal. That's our other big thing. So we want a clear goal. So we don't want to beat around the bush, which is part of the strong start, right? We want a strong start. So we're going to put that down here with a clear goal. They should know what they're getting into, right? We're only going to have like 3 or 4 hours to play. We need to get into it really quick, so we don't need them to get 2 hours into it before they figure out what the goal of the adventure is. They need to know what the goal is from the start off, because they need to accomplish that goal by the end of the play. That's the plan, anyways. And let's see. This is a good villain. That's one of the things. So Sly Flourish, Mike Shea really puts a lot of emphasis on having a good villain. I don't think that's as important for a one shot. That's definitely one of the things where I disagree. I think there's a lot of one shots and successful one shots that I've played in and run, and just adventurers in general, that aren't very villain focused. I feel like you really need to build up a villain, and I'm not sure that because I view one shots very much sort of like short stories when you're writing. In a short story, you don't focus very much on characterization because you don't have the time to build out that character to make the reader care about them that much. As far as their personality and sort of like internal struggles and things like that, we can't have a very rich, in-depth villain. We could have very much a cartoonish villain, like if we wanted a mustache curling, sort of Snidely Whiplash, like I'm a real bad guy kind of thing. You can definitely do that, but I think that gets real stale probably by the second or third time that you do that, especially if you're running multiple one shots. So I don't put that much focus on that as much as what the stakes are. Miracle. So I'm going to put that. So, and stakes. So stakes in this context just means like what will happen if they fail. Like like we have a clear goal. If we don't accomplish this goal, what is the bad stuff? Right. That's all we need there. But that is definitely one of the things. And like I said, this is a really great resource. I really like Sly Flourish and his stuff. But I'm not like a 100% devotee to his way or his like lazy DM prep method. I have a relatively similar way that I prep, but it's not exactly the same. We definitely have differing opinions on a number of things, and this would be one of them. And let's see, a cool location. I think that's helpful. Again, he runs a more higher fantasy game than I think I usually do. I usually run a pretty middling sort of fantasy or even a low fantasy, but it is cool. Locations are cool. So we definitely want to add some sort of cool location. We definitely want that. And I think there's one more bullet point. What's his last bullet point? A satisfying conclusion. That's good. He says conclusion. I would say a climax. So I'd say a really good climax to it. What a And I think so. If we look at back at the duet one that I was just talking about, what part of these did we hit? So the adventure hook, the PC motivation for adventure, well, they were basically told to go on that adventure, and that is a responsibility that they had as being part of that community. So that you had to do it, and this is the last run before winter, and it's on you to get this done, or else, things are those people. The Grin camp isn't going to get that food, and they may starve or they may attack. You know, so that's sort of the adventure hook. We didn't really need to, and because it's a one shot, material wealth or magic items are not. They're not as influential, at least for me as a player. It's not as influential. It doesn't matter to me how much money I get from a one shot adventure if I'm never going to play this character again, right? Because they're never going to be able to spend that money or use that magic item. But if we're doing, like I said earlier, and we're using this as a jumping off point for an ongoing adventure, those things are very important. So you need to understand the differences to whether you're doing a one shot that's just going to be a self contained thing, or if you're using it as sort of the ignition for an ongoing campaign. Because those can be really different. Because I feel like the PC motivation for a standalone one shot isn't that important. I think the plot has to do that holding up. The stakes have to do that holding up. And I think the stakes in my one shot that we talked about earlier is really clear for the PCs. Like, if you don't do this, people are going to die. Did we have a fun climax? Yeah, they took the river trip down with the rushing water from the dam and kind of used that to knock over this pneumatic catapult. I mean, my player enjoyed it, so I felt like it was a fun climax. It was a good way to sort of like very high energy sort of kick things off and sort of end the full session. So I felt like that was a really good one. Did it have a cool location? Uh, I mean, I thought it was cool, and I think my player thought it was cooler after the game was over, because it was only then that I was able to sort of reveal that the little sandbox we were playing the entire one-shot adventure in was based off of a real place. And then seeing that, I was like, oh man, this is much cooler, because this is all built off of like a real places that really exist using a real map. So I wouldn't say, I mean, I guess, is it a cool location? I mean, the strip mine was kind of fun, having the trail, having all these sort of like tidbits and clues of that this is definitely a post-apocalyptic world that has, you're looking at things, the things that you might be able to figure out as a player that is different from what your character might know. So if you find those sorts of little like Easter eggs and fun bits, things interesting and fun, which is something I find very entertaining, then I think you would have fun with that. If you didn't care about that, I mean, it's post-apocalyptic thing. Do you like the post-apocalypse locations? Do you like that setting? Then you'll probably think the locations are cool. I had a pretty strong goal, had clear goals, had the stakes. Yeah, so I think we hit most of those in that. So that's good. All right, so next resource I kind of want to bring up is, let's look at, so we talked about the Game Mastery Guide, and it talks about, this is from Paizo, so this is for Pathfinder, the first edition of Pathfinder. I really don't know that much about the second edition's Game Mastery Guide. I haven't really looked through that. I have it, I just haven't looked through it. I assume it's very similar. And if you're not sure if you're into Pathfinder, you don't want to buy, this book wherever I set it down. There it is. If you don't want to buy this book, which is totally fine, or you just want to try out Pathfinder with your friends, there are beginner boxes now for the first and second edition. And at least in the first edition, it has sort of a very, very stripped down version of the Game Mastery Guide that I think is like 30 pages or something like that. That also does a fantastic job of sort of introducing people to the game, and has lots of just generally good, like how to run games kind of information, how to make adventures. It actually has some information in there about how to take things that are in sort of like the adventure that's built in the beginner's box and how to sprawl that out into like your own sort of adventure campaign. So that's really useful if you're looking for that. And that costs about the same. It costs about $20, I think, 20 maybe 25, and you get like little cardboard stand-ins. It comes with a flip mat, which is worth the $20 by itself. Honestly, flip mats are amazing. They're dry erase, wet erase. You can use Sharpie on them. They're really cool. They fold up smaller than a standard 8.5 by 11 US page, so they fit in just about anything, as far as like folders and things like that. But in here we have the elements of adventure and choosing sort of the adventure. So let's see what they have to say about that. There's a lot of stuff. So they basically have a drop down, and I don't know if you can make this out on the left, but they're basically like dungeons, planar travel, taverns. I think it's kind of weird they put taverns in the middle of making up your own adventure. I mean, they're useful as sort of a hub, but I'm not really sure why they're included in here instead of in the actual world building section or the urban section, which I feel like they would be better suited to. Has some stuff for about urban adventures, or if you want to do water adventures or wilderness adventures. So it kind of gives you some different locations, which I think is really useful. So next to that, I want to look at the 5th edition of D&D's Dungeon Master Guide, where we have... so basically, as far as 5e D&D is concerned, there are basically 2 types of adventure. It's either a location-based adventure, which is you go to a place where the adventure happens, or it is an event-based adventure, which means that the adventure basically happens where you are already. You don't need to travel there. Different. So if you want to look at like the classic D&D dungeon kind of thing, where you go to a dungeon and explore a dungeon, that's very much a location-based adventure. If you're running like a killers on the loose in the city kind of thing, that's an event-based adventure, right? Assuming that you guys are already in the city and the city itself is not the adventure. The adventure just happens within the city. So that's basically how they set it up. I think that may be a little reductive, but it's okay. It's a good setup. So I think for us, we need to decide: do we want? And here, let me put these side by side. It'll be helpful. Do we want it to be a location-based adventure, or do we want to do a event-based adventure? For this, I'd say, and I think most one-shots probably do better, especially if they're initial one-shots, do better as an event-based location. So I think it's going to be an event-based adventure. They're easier, especially for a basic fantasy kind of D&D kind of stuff. Most of them are, I just put down event-based. It's location-based. That's what we're talking about. I think most of them work better as a location-based adventure. It kind of gets players. If they're new players, it kind of tells them a little bit about what a dungeon looks like. If you're going to do a dungeon, something like that. And it gives immediately a reason, especially if you're using this as a jumping off point for making more adventures in the future as sort of an ongoing campaign. It gives them a reason to be in a certain area, locale, right? If you want to start off your campaign for the most part in, say, some frontier village in the Borderlands, and you have PCs that all, like, maybe one or two of them have like urban backgrounds, maybe one of them's a sailor, and none of this place that you're kind of the campaign you're kind of building in your mind maybe doesn't have a lot to do with that. Though you should probably change it if you have somebody with like water-based background, city-based background. Regardless, you want a reason to get them there. Well, having a location-based adventure gives you a good reason to. You guys have a map to a dungeon. You go to the dungeon. There's a town nearby that's going to be your base of operations to start off the campaign. Boom, done. Easy peasy. So I feel like location-based adventures are really good. Now, that being said, I've definitely started off campaigns with city-based, like, event-based adventures, and they work really well. It's perfectly fine. If you agree to start them there. If you want to start off your campaign in a larger city, by all means, run an event-based adventure as a one shot right off the bat. I've done that before, and just drop it into the city. It's perfectly doable, perfectly useful. But I think, especially if you're new to building adventures and running adventures and being a DM or GM, I think location based adventures are usually easier to make and run than event based ones. Because event based ones, when you run an adventure in a big city, you have to be prepared to run a big city. And big cities have a lot of possibilities that gives characters a lot of options, and that can be super overwhelming if you're kind of brand new to running games. The scope of that's kind of woo. So it can be a lot easier to be like, I'm going to put them in the dungeon where the dungeon has ceilings and the floor and the walls, and like it's a contained element that they can walk through and move through, and I can kind of understand everything that should be in and around this dungeon. And then also I have this little settlement off to the side that has some things that they can use, like maybe it has like a blacksmith, maybe there's some potions for sale or something like that. But I don't have to worry about them like going off the rails looking for like specialists, like going to, oh, I want to go to the library. Well, this is a little village, it doesn't have a library. But maybe there's an NPC you can talk to that maybe has some knowledge of whatever it is you're looking for. So I think a location based adventure is going to be really good. Well, I say that, but I also don't want to run a dungeon necessarily. But it's definitely, I definitely want them to go to some place and do something, rather than, because I don't want to build a city basically for a one shot. That's going to be a waste of time. Now, if you have a city or you're doing the world building for an ongoing campaign, then you probably already have that stuff. Then yeah, use the event based, and it'll work out fine for you. So they basically talk about having a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning is basically, it starts off with the hook, right? Same thing that we already talked about. And how the adventurers get drawn into it. So that's sort of the hook. That's also part of the hook, which is, so it's like Flourish, they talked about the hook being the motivation. And here we kind of talk about it being the precipitating event that sort of like gets player characters enveloped into it. So I think very much Sly Flourish and his sort of approach assumes that you're going to have an NPC quest giver, rather than having them stumble across a corpse or something like that that's going to have a treasure map. Which, honestly, I kind of like. So why don't we just use that? So yeah, so that's probably going to be our. Let's make that scene. Let's make it our first little scene here. Is we're going to stumble across a corpse with a we'll say, yeah, let's say treasure map. So that gives us that'll give us a pretty good adventure hook, right? Material, wealth, or magic item, right? What's our hook? What's our PC motivation for adventure? Treasure. Yeah, I mean, right? And we knew it was going to be treasure. So yeah, treasure. That's good. I also like, so if we start off with a corpse, so stumbling across something's not really a super strong start. So we want to make this one a little bit stronger. So they were going to, let's say that this is actually technically the, what we call kind of the climax of a previous adventure. So let's say that they were sent to find a missing person, and then they find missing persons. Then they find the missing person's corpse, and that has a treasure map. Now, I think what's gonna help make this a strong start is that the quest giver didn't mention a treasure map. So they're like, so this person told us to find this other person. We found their corpse, and they have a treasure map with them. But they didn't talk. The person who asked us to come find this person didn't say anything about a treasure, about treasure or a map. So that's gonna pique their interest a little bit. Usually, this is one of those things that will pique player interest, which is what we're looking for. Oh. So it's a so let's say reword this map to a nearby treasure. So a very much sort of like pirate X marks the spot kind of thing. All right, so that's ours. Right, we're gonna have a clear goal. The clear goal is, and this is one of the things where we talk about. So instead of having a direct quest giver for the thing, so they're already going to get paid for finding the corpse. That's fine. So they'll get some extra gold already. Doesn't matter if they completely biff this adventure, they totally screw it up. That's fine. Even if they totally screw it up, they're still going to get paid for finding this corpse. But they might find a nearby treasure, and that might have something to do with the reason that this person is dead. Maybe, maybe not. And then, so that's sort of the opening area. And so that kind of puts these in sort of the middle, what I would call probably in the middle. And then I would probably make this scene 5 is probably going to be the climax. It's going to be the big loggerhead that things are going to come together at. And it's scene 6, if it happens, right? That's why the question marks are there. We don't know what's going to happen. If it does, it'll be sort of a final danger kind of denouement, falling action kind of thing. If it happens. These are really nice. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the stream, is that maybe prep one more scene than you think you might need. And scene 6 would be that for me. And so this is a final danger or falling action. So once they've completed scene 5, they've completed the climax of the adventure. And then, I'll look at my watch down here and I'll look at my time. Be like, we've got like 30 minutes left, so, and maybe they did the final climax went by pretty quickly, or maybe they're really enjoying things, and maybe I feel okay about maybe running over the time limit a little bit. I might be like, I'll go ahead and throw that scene 6 at them after they've used all their big spells and stuff in the climax, and be like, oh no, now there's another fight or whatever the final danger ends up being. Because it doesn't necessarily have to be a fight. It could be some sort of exploration challenge. It could be some sort of negotiation that happens. That's always a really fun one. It could be anything like that. So yeah, the ending here encompasses the climax and the stuff that happens after that. So for location-based adventures, they talk about, identifying the party's goals. We kind of talked about that. Again, this is really good. So they had some roll tables here. Like I said, I didn't really want to run a dungeon, but a wilderness would work. I think I assume treasure is on here somewhere. Stop monsters, trade route, caravan, map a new land, establishing colony, find a natural resource, obtain. I might call this find an object that was lost in the wilds. Well, and discover the fate of a missing group of explorers. Well, that's clearly sort of the lead up here. Doesn't say. All right, but I do like find an object. So instead of just making it generic treasure, let's make it a specific magic item. And here's one thing: if you really want to hook them, we make it a named magic item. It doesn't matter; it could still just be a random +1 sword. But if we make it a named magic item, they're gonna be like, "Oh, well, I want no, I'm struggling to come up with a name. Fenrir's Tooth or something like that." And like, oh, that sounds like a pretty cool magic sword. I definitely want to figure out what that is. And of course, if you have that as the setup, and then you can maybe have them try to see if their characters know any knowledge about Fenrir's Tooth. And that can always be a lot of fun, and be like, oh yeah, no, that's a magical sword said to do great deeds and blah 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 blah. All right, but yeah, so it's pretty much on par with some of the other stuff that we've read. Oh, they had some other goals in here. I'm really surprised just like find treasure is not on there. But you know, a lost object was pretty good. All right, identify some important NPCs. Well, we have a dead person. Was this dead person killed by somebody? And if they were killed by somebody, why didn't that person take the map? These are sort of questions your players will ask. So ask them of yourself. Okay, um, maybe. Mm. So do we want them? Should we have a villain? Yeah, let's have a villain. Why not? Let's just use this table. We've got it right in front of us. Let me pull up. Let's get right here. We were looking at these earlier. So let's just here's a cool thing. If you've never done it before, you can just ask Google to roll a die for you. It doesn't. Something is screwed up with the formatting where it doesn't roll the right die right now for some reason. But let's roll a 20, a 5. Okay. What is 5? A giant bent on plunder. Okay. All right. So our villain is. So this climax is going to have to be a. So our villain is a giant bent on plunder, which again makes it very weird that they would not take the map. So maybe the map's hidden. Look, if you have players like players I have, and most players that I've played with, usually there's at least one person in the group who's gonna. If you come across a corpse, if you come across a dead person, they're gonna turn their pockets out and see what's in them. So let's say that it's hidden. Corpse with a. Let's see. So, right, a giant's big, right? They're a big creature, which means they got big fingers. So, their likelihood of being able to sort of like root through a normal person's pocket is pretty limited, right? Because they got big fingies. Um, so, I think it's perfectly reasonable, especially if this is hidden, which is one thing that people kind of used to do in antiquity. And I guess probably still do to some extent, though it's probably pretty rare now, is to sew valuables into your clothes to sort of hide them and keep them safe. So if you sewed a map into your clothes and a giant was kind of like fingering around your corpse, they might not notice it, right? Because you know they don't have the appropriate sized hands to kind of pat down a person. But isn't like all adventurers in D&D 5e have to be small or medium. I don't think. I think that's right. I don't think there are any large creatures. Well, maybe centaurs are large. Most. Let's just go with most. Most most player characters are medium or small, which means, and this isn't even a check. Like they're gonna find this. If somebody goes, I loot the body or see what the body has on them. If anybody at any point inspects the body, they're gonna find this. Right? There's no check. We don't want to lock them out of the adventure. We want to get them onto the adventure really quick. So, okay. So we have a corpse. So let's say let's say they got their head is smashed. So I think if you do something like this, if you make, since we're dealing with a corpse, if we make that corpse look like it was like something like its head smashed, like it was a lot of force, a lot of blunt force to like watermelon somebody's head. They're like, oh, we must be dealing with a big creature, and there's not bite or fang marks on it, so it's not an animal, right? It's probably not a beast. So now we're gonna telegraph that there's a giant. If we want to, we can have some giant footsteps around, some footprints around if they take the time to look for it. They can find some large sized footprints. So that's fun. Perfect. Scene one done. Love it. Right. So that kind of gives us an investigation sort of scene. All right, so we have our villain. Yeah, let's roll an adventure patron, I guess. Let's do that. So who kind of gave us this initial quest? So obviously, the map itself is the actual quest giver, but who told us to go find the body? Temple official. Okay. All right. So our quest giver is, let's say, like a priest or something. All right. So that kind of gives us an idea, and that makes it very easy to set up. Like, oh, this local priest, the priest at the local temple asked you to go look for somebody. Maybe they're related. We can always make that stuff up on the fly. Find their, brother or whatever who's been missing for a few days. And that's very good, like low level adventure bait. Like, hey, when there's a missing person, uh, everybody who kind of works in the village is not adventurous and have day jobs, and you guys are just sitting around drinking in the tavern. If you'd like to make some more drinking money, if you go find what the heck's going on with my brother who's been missing for a couple of days, that'd be nice. And most parties will jump on that, right? That's a very strong start, very clear goal and stakes. But that would honestly make that background information and just start the scene one with them finding the corpse. Because we don't really need all that background at the end and talking to the quest giver and all that stuff. Like, that's all fluff. We don't need that. We're on a very strict time limit, so let's do that. Flesh out the location details. We don't really need that. We already made the adventure introduction, so we don't need to roll on that. We've got our villain. Allies. So adventure allies are very interesting. Are there going to be any adventure allies? Maybe. Maybe. It depends on how classic we want to go with giants. If we want to go like full fairy tale, like maybe they just eat people, then there might be somebody we can find who's been captured by the giant or is fleeing the giant or somebody else. So that's always kind of fun to kind of give somebody. It's really useful, especially if you want to. If you want a nice release valve that you can kind of, or something that you can sort of inject into a scene to, if the players are going off the rails or they've made a wrong assumption somewhere, and you're trying to get them sort of back on track, and you need a way to sort of like diegetically, like some way in game to give this information to them, it can be really helpful to have somebody like that, whether it's a prisoner or maybe it's somebody who's escaped and is now fleeing the giant that they run across. So this could be a lot of fun. So let's do that. So let's do a little potential ally. And I say ally, but they're actually not going to help them like fight or anything. They're probably not even going to go agree to go back to the giant because the giant was going to eat them. So, but we rolled a 6, so that's a sage. Okay, so we'll put that just kind of. Maybe the sage knows something about giants, maybe about some sort of specific thing they're afraid of, or things like that. There's some sort of weakness they have, even though I don't think most, especially low level giants, which is probably going to be an ogre if we were playing low level D&D 5e. Probably going to be an ogre, which I think is a CR2. Challenge rating 2 monster, which would be a pretty good one for a low level party to take on in their first adventure. And it's still, ogres are pretty easy in 5e. They don't have the greatest stat block. So even though they're CR2, and if I was running this for first level adventures, they could still probably take the ogre. If they do a good job of whittling away its health and it doesn't get too many rounds, because it definitely should have a strong enough attack that if it hits a couple of times, they can definitely kill one of the PCs, which we don't really want, especially if we're trying to start a campaign with these characters. We don't really want them to die in the first session. Greetings. How are you? We are talking D&D one-shot prep and kind of working on that. So we kind of talked about. So we've got sort of the idea. We've got our introduction. We've got a potential ally that we can use. We've got a villain. Uh, it's good. Climax. So I assume the climax will probably be a fight. So they have here. Let's look at some of these. The actions of the adventurers, the villains, result in a cataclysmic event that the adventurers must escape. I feel like most of these climaxes are kind of going to make things more difficult, which I not necessarily want. A threat more powerful than the adventurers appears destroys the main villain and then turns its attention on the characters. That's a really good one if you're wanting to set up a bigger villain for ongoing campaign. Yeah, we are sort of designing a one shot. We're just kind of building one real quick. We kind of went over one that I built for a different system previously, so we're just kind of going over it and kind of looking at some different resources, how people set them up using the books, and just kind of building one right now. So right now, basically, the way that we've got it set up is that we have some players who have been sent to find somebody who's been lost or is missing, and they find the corpse. On the corpse is a hidden treasure map. They will follow the treasure map for a named magic item, which is going to lead them to some sort of giant. I'm assuming an ogre for a low-level D&D 5e party, and they will potentially have a potential ally in a sage, which I think is somebody that they may run across who is either a prisoner or a former prisoner fleeing the giant, who can probably give them some more insight on stuff. And so yeah, that's basically where we are. We're building it out real quick. So yeah, do we want to roll on this idea of climaxes? So a lot of things kind of open it up. I guess it would depend if I was building this one shot, this hypothetical one shot for an ongoing campaign or not. If I was building it for an ongoing campaign, I would probably look at something like this. If I'm not, what would be sort of like a cool climax? I mean, obviously a fight's a big one, right? Fight's usually the go-to, but we could do something else. They could just, if I wanted to set it up with a giant who was maybe not an ogre, maybe this would be a sort of an unkillable threat. If I knew it was going to be a giant that was going to be too high level for them, and I would definitely, if you're a DM, you gotta really telegraph that. You have to make it incredibly obvious that this thing will just kill them if they try to fight it. Especially modern D&D players feel like if you put a bad guy in front of them, they're supposed to fight it, which is very different from sort of the old school sort of idea where they want to fight basically as little as possible. They want to steal and sneak and cheat and ambush and do everything they can do not to have a fair fight with any enemies at any time. But contemporary players, especially 5e players, don't necessarily see that. And I think a lot of that kind of comes from like video game background, right? Hey, if you're playing a video game and video game puts a bad guy in front of you, you assume that bad guy is relatively leveled for you and is supposed to be sort of an appropriate challenge for you. So if you are not going to do that, you need to make it exceptionally clear that that is not the case, because that will be sort of like their default response will be to fight. Because I assume if you put a bad guy in front of them, most players will assume that they're supposed to fight and kill them or overcome them or whatever they're doing. So that is not necessarily what we want to do. And I guess that will depend if you were going to like build off a campaign off of this. If you were using this for the jumping off point, that would be a good place to set the tone for the adventure, for the campaign world, and inform the players diegetically a little bit about the setting. Like, hey, if you guys screw around, you can run into a dragon when you're second level, and that dragon will just breathe fire on you, and you'll all be dead. So it's good to sort of set that up. We have that potential ally, so we could have the potentially kill the ally in a very, very distinct and very gruesome manner to make it clear, like, oh, it just hit that guy with a club, and now that guy is like a stain on the ground. Maybe we don't fight this thing. So just make sure, like, if you're gonna do that, you gotta really, really telegraph it. Make a big dog and pony show about it. Don't fight this guy. He's very dangerous. You should run away. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I will just straight up tell them, like, your characters are citizens of the world in which they're playing in. They understand that something like running into something like a giant is incredibly bad news, and it will very much kill people. And it happens not super uncommonly. It's not super rare. For if a person comes across a giant, the giant kills them. So it seems like something that they would know, that there would be warnings of, like, hey, if you see giants, you go in the other direction. So I don't know if I want to do. The thing is that they could try to steal. I guess it depends on the sort of adventure that I want to run. Do I want to run a sneaky adventure, or do I want to run a more combated adventure? So if I want to run, I kind of like the sneaking idea. Maybe they want to. Yeah, maybe they just want to sneak around. Maybe they want to get this piece of treasure for them. So we're going to put this down here. So this is going to be a very. I think that's the name of the game. Don't Wake Daddy. Yep. That's the name here. Let me swap these guys around. No. There we go. So I believe the name of the little board game with the little guy that sleeps in the bed and the kids are like sneaking around the house. And it's called Don't Wake Daddy. So I think that's going to be in. So we're going to try to like sneak around and right, that'll be on me as the DM to very much telegraph giants are bad news, and that's definitely something that the potential ally of the sage, if they run across him, the sage is definitely going to tell the party, be like, this guy's very, very dangerous. Like, don't try to fight him. They'll probably tell him, like, oh, I saw him wipe out like a whole contingent of guards. Like, this guy's really bad news. Like, don't try to fight him. So they're gonna have to sneak around. Which will be fun. And then we'll have some mobs. We'll have some ads for them. So there will be some combat. So it's not a totally no combat thing, because then players will get really bored. I want to try to make sure that there's a mix of like some social stuff, and there's some exploration, investigation stuff, and then there is some combat. So right now we've got potentially 6 scenes. So I like this final danger is maybe if we use it, if we need to do it. So that's the thing, is that the fallen danger is sometimes an optional scene. This is you need to escape the giant. I'll move this so you guys can hit. So maybe there could be like an alarm that goes off. Can I zoom in a little bit? Nope, that didn't really work. That's okay. Move up. Grab and move. There we go. So, and the scene 6 is like, if I have enough time, because one shot we have a very small window that we're trying to play within to try to get everything wrapped up. So if I'm ahead of schedule, if I have some time, or maybe they kind of breeze through some stuff, I'll have maybe like when they go to grab Fenrir's tooth or whatever we're calling the magic item, if it's a magic sword. It's going to set off an alarm. It's going to be very Indiana Jones style. The alarm's going to go off. The giant's going to chase them through the forest or whatever setting they're in, and they're going to have to figure out how to escape the giant. Because the giant catches you, it's definitely going to kill you. So I think we've definitely set this up. It's just very much, the giant is definitely supposed to be unkillable challenge. Again, it's on us as the dungeon master, as a game master, that we have to be very explicit about telegraphing that this is not supposed to be a, everybody lines up toe to toe and have a fight about this. Like, if you try to fight this creature, it's gonna kill you. and especially if we're trying to use this to introduce a new sort of campaign. We don't want to be killing characters in the very first session, in the very first one shot. If we're using that to sort of set up the world, or maybe you do. Like, there's definitely, if you are familiar with, we looked at some Matt Colville stuff at MCDM earlier, and in the Chains of Acheron, he basically sets up the very first session for one of the main characters to die, and that's supposed to be, and that's worked out with the player ahead of a time just to make it very dramatic and kind of like show the stakes and the threat of everything that's going on, which is very useful. So I could definitely see, like, if you wanted to set up a larger campaign and you wanted this magic item, this named magic item, to play a significant part in that, that you would try to end the one shot with killing all the player characters. But I think you would have to work with your players beforehand, so they weren't super invested in wanting to play this specific character that they just made for the entire campaign. That might be one of the things where it's like you want to do the one shot, you want to find out what happens with the magic item. Like, that's going to be the campaign. And right, you'll build new characters for that, and they'll be able to sort of like visit that old location. That might be how you kick off the campaign. But for the one shot, probably not looking to kill everybody in it. Though, I mean, I've definitely ended one shots killing everybody. Usually not on purpose, though. Usually that's player error if that happens. The last time I ran a one shot where the total party wiped is because they tried to do a full frontal assault on a bandit camp that had like 20 people in it. I mean, there's only so many times you could tell them, hey, there's a lot of people in this camp. They're like, no, running right in, and they were all strung out. They weren't even together, so I mean, it was real bad. But that was definitely a player problem. That wasn't, or at least I think it was a player problem. I tried to make it as explicit as possible to be like, this is a not good idea that you're doing. But there's one of the DM pieces of advice that I like is that it is our job as dungeon masters and game masters to protect your players from ignorance. We talked about that earlier, about making sure that when we're looking at the old one, make sure that they have all the information to make an informed decision and make informed choices about what they want to do. Like, if you have a player that's like, yeah, I just want to like sort of jump down off the ledge, and you're like, okay, but it was a bottomless pit and now you're dead, and you're like, well, I didn't know it was a bottomless pit. You didn't say it was a bottomless pit. I thought it was like 10 feet down. Right, so it's our job to protect them from ignorance. If you're like, hey, if the player's like, I'm gonna drop down off this ledge, and you're like, okay, so when you look over the ledge, it disappears down into darkness beyond where your torch can see, and you know that your torch does 30 feet of bright light and then another 30 feet of dim light, and you cannot see the bottom from that 60 feet. And they're like, yeah, it's fine, I'll drop off the ledge. Okay, well, then you're going to take however many feet in fall damage and probably die. Like, we're supposed to protect them from ignorance, not stupidity. Right, that's the difference. If I give you all the information and make it very as explicit as possible that whether something, it's a very, very dumb idea, is a dumb idea that you don't think their character in their right mind would choose, then you should tell them that. And if they choose to do it anyways, well, then you deal with the consequences of your actions. Right? Maybe that's a bit harsh, but dumb players die. That's just how it goes. All right, so that was all that. So another thing that I want to use, and we haven't looked at it yet. So this is the DMG as well, but this is actually the 4th edition of D&D's DMG, which I think is a much better book, a much better Dungeon Master's Guide than the 5th edition is. And that just kind of comes from the layout. So you can kind of look at these two. Let's look at these two right side by side real quick. So if we look at this, in the 5th edition DMG, it goes Introduction, Build a World. build an adventure. Here are rules how to run the game. So, which seems completely backwards from the way that I would organize it. Like if you are a brand new DM and you're like, all right, the Dungeon Master's Guide is going to be the guide to tell me how to Dungeon Master. And the first thing it says is like, hey, you need to make like an entire world in planescape. I'm gonna be like, to run a pre-published adventure? No. Where this one, I think, has a much better layout and has much better information in the 4th edition. Chapter 1, how to be a DM. Just straight up front. Hey, here's how to run the game. Here's how to build some combat encounters. Or here's information about combat encounters and how to run them, sorry. And then how to build encounters. And then how to do not combat encounters. And then adventures, rewards for those adventures, and how to turn those adventures into campaigns, how to set those campaigns in a world, and then all the extra stuff that talks about, being able to customize, create monsters, all that good stuff. But yeah, I mean, I don't feel like this is much better, has a much better setup for me. I feel like this makes a lot more sense. But we have it right here where it talks about, look, it even goes into published adventures, how to fix problems with your adventures. Like, it's, honestly, I just feel like it's a much better book. So if you were looking, I would say, unless you really need the math part of the 5th edition DMG, where you want to know how to set DCs and how much damage, like, improvised situations and stuff do, and like if you need the encounter building tools, which I feel like most DMs either use encounter building tools in D&D Beyond or something else like Kobold Fight Club, because trying to create balanced encounters in 5e using the DMG by hand is just a nightmare, honestly. Like, let the computers do the math for you. But this does a much better job of, like, it tells you, hey, here are the components of adventure. All right, do we have a start and an end? Well, we haven't really talked that much about the end, so let's talk about the end real quick. So my assumption is that obviously after you have this climax, and one of the things we also need to do is talk about failure. So I think if they fail stealing the item, that's probably going to push them into the scene 6, which is going to be the giant's going to chase you down. And then the assumption is that the end of the adventure will end them in the settlement in which they got the initial pre-adventure adventure, which was to find out what happened to our missing person. So return to the nearby settlement, which is probably a village or a small town. Talk to the priest and be like, hey, we found your brother. I think we said it was brother. This is all very loosey-goosey. We really actually don't need to firm any of the stuff until we're at the table. Of course, as you firm that stuff up, whether you're doing it in prep or at the table, note it. Because somebody's going to ask you about it, or you're going to have to remember it later. Like, if I'm not sure if I remember who the quest giver is, I better write it down. But we don't really need to know anything else about the priest other than who they are and where they are. And, of course, we would give them a little bit of gold or something for finding the dead body, coming back with something for it. So that's sort of where the adventure will end. Okay, where's the situation taking place? We haven't discussed this. Again, these are all really good questions that we have. And actually, can I zoom in a little bit? This is pretty small for you guys. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Da-dum. Da-dum. That's a little much, but that's fine. It talks about, all right, what is the situation? Okay, the situation is we're going to find that person. That person's going to have a hidden treasure map on them, and we're going to be like, oh, because we have a named magic item, they're going to be interested in that. What led up to this situation? Well, that's a good question. We could ask the dead guy, but assuming this is a level 1 party or a low level party, probably nobody's going to have speak with dead with dead. But remember, no prep survives contact with your party, with your players, so they might find the dead corpse and be like, we're going to take that back to the quest giver. And the priest probably, depending on the level of magic of the campaign you're going to run, if they bring it, I would say if I was DMing this and if I was just doing a one shot and I wasn't planning to do an ongoing campaign where I needed to worry about like sort of the level of magic of the world, like how magical the world is and how easy magic is to access for most people. If they grab the corpse and were like, okay, we're gonna hoof it back to town real quick, even after finding the treasure map, we'll dump off the body, we'll get paid, we'll maybe get some more gear, and we'll go after this treasure. Which I think is a pretty reasonable thing for your party to do, not immediately go after the treasure and then come back for the corpse, even though that would probably be what I would do if I was a player. But if they brought it back to the priest, I see no reason if they ask, have the priest have the ability to cast Speak with Dead. And then we can answer these questions. What is the situation? What led up to it? What killed you? All that sort of stuff. So they'll have those very specific questions they'll be able to ask. So we know why the PCs care. They're going to want that named magic item. It seems really cool. If the cooler we make it sound, the cooler they're going to want it. Fenrir's Tooth sounds pretty cool to me. I'm sure one of my PCs will... Somebody's going to use a sword in a party, probably. That's why magic swords show up more than basically any other item. Especially in old school D&D. Somebody's going to be able to use the freaking sword. So, and I can make it whatever sword. I mean, heck, I can make it a pick. I can make it a spear. Right, if we keep it super vague about what Fenrir's Tooth is, then I can find out what weapons the characters are using. And if I know that, I can just make it one of those weapons when they get there. So maybe the legends don't say exactly what type of weapon Fenrir's Tooth is, only that it's a powerful weapon, one of legendary lore. So if we do something like that, then they're going to want to do it. They're going to want to find it out and go grab it. And when they do that, I can make it whatever weapon it needs to be. I mean, probably not a hammer. Probably can't make it a warhammer. Tooth kind of infers there's going to be some sort of sharp edge to it, whether it's a piercing or slashing weapon. So probably not a bow or a sling or, well, I mean, you could make it a bow, I guess. That'd be a little weird. You could make it an arrow. That would be fun. A +1 arrow, which is very low level thing to give out. But if you made it like an unbreakable arrow or something like that, that'd be kind of cool. If you had like a ranger or something like that, or maybe a cool elf fighter, that'd be a fun one to throw in there. But if we keep it loosey goosey, we can, and we don't know what everybody's going to play yet. We can make sure that it fits for somebody. And of course, there'll be some other treasure as well. All right, so what led up to the situation? Well, clearly they heard the story. They found the giant's camp. They know that it's caught. So they're going to know some information. If they start asking around, or if they get in a situation to ask around, they're going to find out that this giant, because that's what we know about them, is that this giant is bent on plunder. This giant has been looking for maybe specific magic items or just sort of a mountain of treasure in general. And obviously, if this is low-level D&D, they're probably not very far along on that. On making their own treasure hoard. But maybe they have this one item. This one legendary item. So that would lead up to the situation. So I can very much see that this is sort of a Jack and the Beanstalk sort of situation with the person who ended up getting killed. So they were like, okay, I know where it is, or maybe they heard legend from somebody. They bought the map off of somebody. They were following the map. They got killed. You know, the PCs find the map, and they're going to sort of complete the quest themselves. They're going to thieve that magic item for themselves. Does solving the situation require going somewhere? Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't talked about exactly what. Um, well, we haven't talked about what the location is. We know this is location based, but we haven't talked about what that location is. And I think for that, I want to pull up something I've used before. This is actually my own document. So this will just kind of give us an idea, which will be kind of fun. So this kind of helps me sort of brainstorm. And I've talked about this multiple times. Can I zoom in on this? I have to get in here. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. All right, so we've got some stuff in here. So I want a location theme, a location, and then sort of the environment, because we don't know any of those things yet. So we've got, let's roll a d6, a d6, and a d12. Okay. D6 and a d12. All right, so an artificial theme, which just means it's sort of man-made rather than being natural or weird. Some sort of natural structure. Ooh, and a 12. What's the adventure environment? A wetland. Okay. So a swamp. What would be an artificial theme? Well, I guess the artificial theme is that it's got a giant in it. And what did I roll? I rolled a 4. Natural structure. Some sort of natural structure that would be in there. It's gonna be big enough for a giant. Maybe like a hollowed out like giant dead tree. Yeah, I like that. That's maybe like 2 or 3 story for a giant, but it's like a big like Yggdrasil kind of like enough room that they're like one or more giants can go inside and walk around inside. So I like that. All right. So and that's definitely going to fulfill our cool location quota. Yeah, so it's a giant dead like hollowed out tree. It's the home for our giant. In the middle, I guess of let's make it a bog. In the middle of a bog. That's fun. So yeah, all right. So now we know that there's a location that we're going to go to. That's what the location is going to be. So now now that we've started to figure out some of these things, I want to make sure that, like I said, we have sort of a mix of things. It's combat and exploration and social. So we had our strong start, which is very much sort of an investigation thing, trying to figure out what's going on, like investigating the corpse and finding the treasure map and looking that over. That's very exploration. All right. So I'm just gonna put a little E here, just temporarily, so we know that that's exploration. So scene 5, I'd also say that that's probably an exploration one as well. I mean, honestly, so it's 6 if that happened. All right, so we've got a whole bunch of exploration, so we don't really need more explorations. So they've got a map, so we want to make it relatively easy for them to get to the giant's place. So what we need maybe for one shot, I'd probably say like 2 combats and maybe 1 social. So I think that probably makes it easier to do. And I try not to do too many of the same type of scenes back to back. So I'd say like this is a combat, this is a combat, and this is a social scene. I say that so our hint. One of the things that I want to make sure that I do, and it's just sort of a good D&D role in general, is that if you're going to make a combat scene, never assume that your players are going to actually do a combat. There are other resolutions. All a combat scene really means is that there's going to be some sort of creature in there, and it's likely to be hostile. Without them, maybe they'll talk to it, maybe they won't. I think scene 3 is a real good way to do the. So I think scene 3 is a good thing. That's where we'll put the sage. So I think we'll just kind of put here. So the bog. So I think they find that right. We don't need to do like a survival check and do something like that for them to be able to follow a map to a bog. And again, there's going to be a gigantic tree in the middle of it. It's going to be kind of hard to miss. So there's not a lot of necessarily getting lost kind of aspects that we want to deal with. That's not really the point of this one shot. I really enjoy that stuff. I like the wilderness survival, like bumming around, looking at things through exploration, getting lost, and having to track rations, all that stuff. But that's not what this one shot's about. So I just want to kind of like, all right, you follow the path through the woods for a little bit. You notice things start to get muggy, and there's a lot more like mosquitoes and gnats and all sorts of like bugs and stuff. And then you notice that the ground is starting to sort of squelch as you walk, and then before you know it, you're ankle deep in water, and everything smells really gross, very much of decay and death. As you can see that you've now entered the bog that's on the map, and then you can see in the distance you can see these gnarled, dead branches sticking out over the like green level of the trees that are in this bog, surrounding this bog. So you're like, okay, that's clearly where we're going. We're on the right path. So we need something that's suitably boggy. Now, 5e doesn't really have a bog kind of thing, but we can do a couple plus. This is my preferred sort of method as far as goes to. Let's go ahead and switch this over to dark mode. That's a little aggressive. So we don't care about the size, we don't care about the creature type, but we do want to do this. So we want something that's either aquatic, and I think there's a swamp, right? Swamp. All right, so we want, let's just say, we didn't really put a level on that, but let's just assume, maybe, let's just assume 4 first level characters. And I always try to make, so that's just the way that I build encounters, I always make it hard. That's not really great. Let's get something else. Mud methods would be fun. That'd be a fun thing for them to run across. And mud methods do speak. I should know this. Leah has a method as a familiar. And that, by the way, we play that solo RPG game on Sundays. So if you want to check that out, make sure to come back on Twitch on Sundays. Or if you can't watch during that time, we also have the videos on YouTube. All that stuff's that way. Down that way, you can see it's just YouTube at Red Ragged Fiend. You can watch the backlog. We're about to do episode 11. But Leah has a method familiar. So I think that's a good one. I like methods. Usually it's a swamp, and the swamp creatures are kind of boring. They're going to throw a lot of frogs at you. They're going to throw a lot of quippers, snakes, that sort of thing. Or they're just going to throw humanoids. Banshee's really good too, but that's pretty high CR. Yeah, so you get a lot of animals for the most part. Do we have some bullywugs? Bullywugs would be fun. Vegapygmies, darklings. Crocodiles always a go-to. Crocodiles are really tough though, especially for low-level characters in the water. Like a crocodile will wreck your party if you're not careful, because they'll death roll them and pull them to the bottom, and then they'll just drown them. Especially if your character doesn't have a lot of strength and they have really a lot of difficulty breaking out of that grapple. Well, they can just be dead. So I don't really want to. Swaggin, a good one. Ghouls, always a favorite of mine. Swarm of rot grubs. Swarm of rot grubs. It's fun, but it's not necessarily a combat encounter in my mind. That's more like the classic going to the water and then you come out covered in leeches kind of feel. There's a half ogre, sea spawn, quipper swarm, park wheel. Definitely don't want to do a Wormling or a Druid. Yeah, there's our Ogre. CR2. Yeah, let's go with methods. Yeah, so they find like 3 methods. So scene 2 are gonna be like. So is there anything special about? So one of the things that we want to do is some. We talked about this earlier about making goals for the scene. Is the goal to just so we can either set it up with the mud methods with the opportunity for them to sneak around the methods, or do we want to give them some sort of treat, some sort of thing to sort of entice them to engage with the mud methods, maybe? Um, hmm. I was thinking about we could put the sage there if the mud methods are. Yeah, I kind of like that. Maybe the mud methods are accosting the sage, right? So kind of make a transition between scenes 2 and 3. And if they step in to help, I mean, the sage just keeps running. So then they got to go track the sage down. And that's technically 2 different scenes. And so I'm thinking like there's probably like wading through this gross bog water, making their way towards the dead tree, and then they're gonna hear this laughter and the magical zips and zooms of the attacks of these methods that are pretty much probably just toying with the sage, who is probably running away trying to save their own skin. Yeah, and we'll put it at this point that the sage is fleeing. They're fleeing the sage. So there's mischief and laughter. They can step in. I mean, if they want to, they can let the methods just kill the sage. I mean, most players aren't going to do that. Because we also want to telegraph and make it very clear that the sage is not fighting back. They're fleeing. They're running. So they're sort of fleeing for their wife, and that these methods are certainly being cruel. Right? They're not just killing the sage out loud. They're doing that very sort of mischievous kind of fey thing, even though technically there are elementals in that fey, I believe. But they are definitely just trying to attack this thing, and they're having fun at the sage's expense. And that's pretty super easy. And then scene 3 is real easy too. I mean, you can s s. I mean, this is literally just going to be ask the sage questions. That's basically all scene 3 is going to be. You can He'll be able to tell them about the ogre or whatever giant's going to be there. Well, it's not going to be an ogre, right? We want to make it sure it's an unkillable threat. So let's do that real quick. So let's knock these out. I don't care about that. We want a giant of some type. Ooh, probably not a CR11. So I definitely want to keep it sort of 5 is probably going to be my cutoff point. Ooh, an Etten. An Etten's really good. They're just fun. They're a fun RP because you basically get 2 NPCs for the price of 1. Yeah, and they will absolutely like demolish this guy. Like, because they need to be right for. That's 6 players. That's not what I want. I want 4 players. I want to change the level. Yeah, so I mean, it's a hard fight. 1 Eden is a hard fight for 4 third level characters. So if we want to do that, and then it'll give us a lot of fun that we'll be able to have with the Eden sort of looking around things, and then we'll make it a little bit more dynamic, make it feel like it's a little bit more difficult for them sort of sneaking around trying to get the booty from from the end trying to get that magic item. And they can ask questions about anything, really. All right, so that was yeah. I mean, that's really I really don't need any more. I might um, if I was a newer DM, I would probably have some talking points for the stage, but for a one shot, all that stuff's gonna be really straightforward. And because it's a one shot, I can if they ask me something that I don't know based off of the information I have here, I'll just make it up. I mean, we could use one of the things that I think is it in the DMG? Let's see. It's not in this DMG. It's in the 5e DMG. So I thought one of the things that's in here is creating a magic item. So I would, if I was spending more time and I was going to run this for real, because I'm not really planning on this. This is just kind of a hypothetical exploration of how to create a one shot, and that's why it's taking me such a long time. If I was doing this by myself, I would have been done with this a long time ago. But I want to walk through the steps and talk about it with you guys, so you guys can see sort of my thought process and how I go about it. So if I was creating a magic item, I'd use these rules in here, and so that way I'd have some blurbs about the magic item. Which is really weird. I thought there was like a whole. Oh, it's in chapter 7. Of course, creating a magic item isn't in the. Again, thanks, guys. Maps. So, what chapter are we in if we're not in chapter 7? Or in chapter 9? What is this? What chapter is this? Oh, it's still chapter 9. Yeah, because the information about creating a magic item, but to actually give that magic item some flavors in a totally different section, because this is a really great, well laid out book that's really useful. Again, don't use this book very often. All right, those are some very specific ones. I don't really want to wait. Oh, wait, here it is. So artifacts. So yeah, I would add some stuff and with some beneficial properties, like maybe what's this one? While attuned to the artifact, you can use an action to cast one cantrip chosen by the DM from. That's a pretty cool one. That's a pretty cool one. If I was running, well, no, I wouldn't. I was about to say I'd rule. God, what is the terrible 5e cantrip? I'm really selling it. What is that terrible 5e cantrip? The one that nobody ever uses because it's dumb because it's an action. It's gonna be in the different. It's gonna be over here. I can't believe I can't remember off the top of my head. It's such a terrible one. Bane, burning hands, cause your chaos bolt charm person. Because it's not guiding strike, right? It's the one that you cast. It was in the original player's handbook. It's one that nobody uses because you have to use an action that gives you advantage on your next attack. And it's like it's the action economy is just like just make 2 attacks. Why would you spend time to cast to try to make it better to hit instead of just trying to attack twice? But I don't remember. You're only supposed to be showing me cantrips. No, that's why I can't find it. Show me everything but cantrips. There we go. It's not guidance. Oh, but guidance would be a really good one. Man, if I had a sword that casted guidance, oof, oof, so good. Molder for this flame resistance, flame, shocking grasp. True Strike, right? That's True Strike. That's the right one. Yeah. So True Strike, terrible cantrip, right? You have to spend an action, concentration for a cantrip. So you have to cast the spell, be like, I'm gonna hit you with advantage next round, unless you hit me, and then I have to make a concentration save, which I may fail, and then I won't have that, and I'll have completely wasted my action for a cantrip that didn't do anything. Yeah, but if I would make a magic item that's going to have True Strike on it, but it's going to use it as a bonus action. I'll probably have to put some limitations on that because if you play a fighter or somebody who doesn't have a lot of bonus actions, a lot of things to do on a bonus action, you probably don't want to give them basically free advantage on every attack every round because I mean they'll only get on one attack. I'd also not make it concentrate. Well, that would be more useful for a fighter if you made it a bonus action, but also still had the concentration. That's a lot to kind of keep track of, and people playing fighters aren't super used to keeping track of concentration. But maybe again, I would workshop it a little bit, and it would be definitely a thing that I would give it to a player and be like, hey, we haven't tested this out yet. I reserve the right to change it if this gets way too dumb. I will change it up, so it's not super broken. Yeah, but our city should be able to give us some information about Fenrir's tooth, maybe. Probably the properties. If I'm hopefully by this point, I would know what weapons people are using and what I might give them to because I'll have seen them just go through a fight, and so I'll be able to answer those questions. He'll be able to tell them that it's an Eden that does this. I'll probably be able to tell you a little bit about the person who had the map and things like that, which again I can make all that stuff up because it's one shot and who cares? If that character's dead, you're not going to be able to find any more information out about him. And so yeah, they'll be asked questions. He'll be like, oh well, he can give them a general idea of where the magic item is, so they can find it more easily. Because scene 4, so this whole scene 5 is going to be basically, don't wake daddy, and they're going to have to sneak around. And I'd probably make a few rooms, right? A few rooms for them to sneak around in, maybe 3 or 4. If I wanted to make that tree maybe 3 levels, yeah, I'd do that. So it would be like an outer yard, sort of first floor, and third floor. So kind of give them this area, and then I might determine randomly where the Eden starts out, and as the players make a move through the sort of those areas, the Eden has a chance to move as well. So the Eden's dynamic and is also sort of moving in and out of their treehouse doing whatever Edens do on a daily basis. So there's a chance that they might have to hide because the Eden's going to come into the room. And of course, everything's giant size, so they'll be like diving under the bed and stuff like that, trying to hide. So it'll be a lot of fun. Things like that. That'll be a fun one for them. And then, obviously, I mean, you say obviously, but maybe not. You put, and this, like, this Eden is bent on plunder, so they're going to be displaying this thing. It's not like it's going to be hidden away in a corner in a cupboard somewhere. Like it's going to be on display. It's like it's their showpiece, like talking point item that really brings the room together, right? So they're not going to have to look for it. They just need to find it and grab it. Again, like maybe I do like an Indiana Jones kind of thing, depending on the amount of time that's left in the session. So one of the things is we want to cut out from the middle if we can. So if I need to, if I was running short with time, I just wouldn't have the sage. I would be like, oh, you come across some methods who see you. Well, they might see you. Maybe they would. And you can decide to attack the methods. You can talk to the methods if you want to. Maybe you can bribe them with something, and they'll tell you a little bit about the end. Or if you displease them, they'll attack you. Don't necessarily method doesn't necessarily have to be a combat encounter, and we can use the method to answer some questions if we don't want to use this. If we don't want to do an entirely different scene for the sage. And the bun methods can just be screwing around in the bog. It's whatever. So that's going to be that, and then more. So I think that session 4. So this is going to be where we have to transition to. We're just going to call it Dead Treehouse. I was trying not to call it that, but that's what it is. It's a dead treehouse. So yeah, I mean, then we just need one more. Of course, I throw in some other treasure in here specifically for that. If you guys have been following me around and watching some of the other stuff, you know that I have this. This is my DM's binder, which is technically a folder. But I have some like minor treasures for like pocket contents, things like that. If they decide to search around places, or maybe if I want to give them a little bit of treasure, maybe the sage gives them a little bit of pocket money that they have from if the PCs save them from the methods. Little extra treasure to kind of sprinkle out and around, and I can do that on the fly. It could be really fun because I have some random tables in there to just let the players roll for it. That's always kind of like a little fun bonus thing. Like, I don't know what you're going to get. You're going to have to roll for it. And we've seen that happen in our solo RPG that I've been running on Sundays, and we've rolled 2 magic items so far, like on a whim. We've got that Horn of Alarm, and what's the other magic item? Oh, we got a scroll. Right, we got a scroll that we couldn't use, so she was going to sell that off. That was the other magic item. It's like a cleric scroll, I believe. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of fun to do that and be like, you could get a magic item if you roll well. And players really enjoy that kind of stuff. So they feel like anything could happen, right? Anything could pop up. I mean, within reason. I mean, they're not gonna get like a +3 Holy Avenger, but they might get some sort of magic trinket or maybe a potion or something like that, and they'll be super happy about that. It'll be probably super useful for them. All right, we need another combat. So something that happens between the sage and us getting there. I'm thinking that maybe this Eden has some sort of guard creatures that's maybe on the outset that sort of patrol, or maybe some servants. Those are always fun. So let's say I'm a big fan. Let's see if they're in here. Yeah, there's some bullywugs. What if I wanted to? Let me just 3. I want to make this a hard encounter. I can't just. Boop, boop, boop. So maybe a few bullywugs are up there. They're sort of serving as the guard, maybe. I like bullywugs. They're fun. They can jump around. They can swim. They can do all sorts of fun stuff. So if you're going to put your players in the water, you want to give them some creatures that can also do some stuff in the water. It kind of puts them at a disadvantage. Maybe they can find some high ground, something like that. So maybe I mean, I said that, but let's. I think it could also be cool to have. What else we got in here? We probably got some other stuff. I'm not sure that I want to do. I want to move something else in here. What else we got? Let's do it. CR. Frogs, shrinkers, flying snakes. What's something a little bit bigger? Ooh, sturges would be fun. Sturges are a classic sort of swamp creature. Maybe we do like 2 bullywugs, maybe some sturges? Maybe just like 1 bullywug. How many sturges can we get then? Yeah, let's do that. Or we could also reskin something. Reskin a tribal warrior. So if I added, I'm just trying to make it a little bit more dynamic because we've kind of been doing 1 creature encounter so far. Yeah, maybe something like that. So we might have like we're going to reskin some tribal warriors to be bullywugs. And so they'll have the same properties that the normal bullywug has. They'll be able to jump, they'll be able to swim, they'll do that sort of stuff. But otherwise, they're just going to be kind of mooks. So the idea is that we're going to have this combat scene, and these are going to be right here. We'll change this to. Will be quippy, right? Scene 3 is sage advice. Which, if you guys aren't familiar, I don't know why you wouldn't be. But sage advice is one of the things Dungeons Dragons puts out for primarily for playtest materials for 5th edition and things like that. Is in the column they call sage advice. So just a like fun thing for myself. So season 4, I think we're gonna. So I think this N probably holds some sort of sway over these ones. So we're gonna have a bullywug. We're gonna have a sturge master. So this is sort of like a mosquito master kind of warrior. So this is, and then we're gonna have 2 bullywug thugs, or we'll just call them warriors, which are just reskinned. So like I said again, they're going to be able to breathe underwater. They can swim. They'll have a swim speed. They'll be able to jump. I think bullywugs also have a stench thing, a stench aura thing in 5e, or maybe that's 4e. Sometimes they do. So I wouldn't give them there. Oh, good morning. How are you? Sorry, I didn't see that come in. So yeah, I would reskin those tribal warriors to do the bullywugs. And then that kind of gives us a little bit more dynamic encounter. It's going to give us like 3 different enemy types. We're going to have the Sturges, which are always kind of a fun encounter. And for a level 1, we have to be careful because for a level 1 party, this can be a really kind of difficult combat because they're going to be outnumbered. And that can always kind of go because they're going to be outnumbered 6-4 is what we plan. So it's really tough. And Sturges attach and stick on and then kind of do static damage. So they can be dangerous on their own. So, but my idea is that probably while I was running this, the Sturge Master, if they killed the Sturge Master, the Sturges would probably fly away, which can be a cool kind of goal for somebody in the counter. No, how can you help? And honestly, we're getting pretty close to being done here. We're just making a one shot for D&D. We've been working on it for a little bit. I went over some other resources earlier, And we're just about in. Actually, this may be the last scene that we need to fill out. Yeah. So I mean, other than that, I would do what I usually kind of do, and this is pretty much like this is. I don't think they're probably going to be able to talk to the Bullywug guards because the guards are very much in the service of the Etten, so they're probably not going to be able to do that. So this is probably just going to be just a straight up combat if they get caught. No, they could always try to sneak around. Right? I think these guys are going to be somewhere. So I would probably, we just said Bullywug guards, but these guys are going to be like patrolling. So I want them near the dead tree house, but not necessarily so close that if they have a combat with the PCs, that the PC that's going to necessarily alert the Etten. So it's maybe like kind of in the distance, but also, the Etten's doing their own thing. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So that's really all we need for this. Now, the last thing that we'd probably do down here, if I wanted to throw some other stuff down here, that some things that I sort of build sometimes is that I might have it's sort of a crib sheet. You gotta spell things correctly. So I'd have NPC details. I might have some treasure. Normally, if I was running a standard adventure, I'd probably have some sort of wandering monster encounter table, but because we're making a one shot and we've got a very sort of like tight deadline, it's got a tight 3 to 4 hours that we're probably planning the game for. I don't really want to throw a lot of extra encounters in there. If I did, I might borrow one of the encounters from somewhere else in the adventure. So if they start screwing around too much, so let's say we get to this sage encounter, right? So they're talking to the sage, and maybe they're just kind of going around in a circle, right? They've asked questions, they're trying to ask some extra questions, but they're not really getting anywhere, or I don't really have any additional information to give them, and I feel like they're just kind of burning time in the session at that point, which would be the time that I would probably introduce something like a wandering monster for a random encounter. Instead, I would probably, if it was in the sage scene, I would probably just steal this Bullywug guard scene and be like, "Oh, yeah," and then some Bullywugs show up, and the sage freaks out and runs away, and now you've got to deal with some Bullywugs. Nice treasure is always a treasure map. Probably the problem with that for us right now is that is actually our hook for the adventure. Is we're using a treasure map. That's our strong start we've got here. So we've sent to find a missing person, but that dead person has a treasure map on them. And I don't really need to make up the treasure right now, but I would roll up some random treasure that was appropriate for characters of that level. I'd flesh out a little bit of like detail, a couple bullet points, be like, oh, this is kind of what the priest looks like. This is kind of what the sage looks like. This is maybe a little bit of their mannerisms, or I might. One thing that's really sort of helpful if you're doing this is that I've seen, and I think actually if Sly Flourish talks about this, I'm pretty sure Matt Colville's talked about, and a lot of people talk about this, is to a useful thing to do to like give you an idea about how to sort of step into an NPC to like roleplay them, especially important NPC, is to pick a specific character from fiction or a specific character actor and kind of go with that. And so that could be really a real easy way to like inject a lot of role playing, a lot of character into the NPC, a lot of character into the NPC without having to write out like a whole bunch of information about like their mannerisms and what they want. If I'm just like, oh yeah, well this guy's just like Sam Elliott, and I'm like, all right, well Sam Elliott plays kind of the same guy because he's a character actor, and most movies and TV shows kind of plays the same guy most of the time. So this guy just acts like Sam Elliott or a Sam Elliott character. Easy. That's right. 2 words gives me a whole lot of information about how to play that NPC correctly. I'd have some treasure. I could have some additional location details. This would be also an area that I would put if I was running a larger adventure or an ongoing like multi-session adventure. I'd add maybe some additional hazards, maybe some additional things that they could run across and find out. But for a one shot, I want to keep things pretty streamlined. So we've got a number of exploration scenes. We really only have the one social scene, which kind of makes sense. I mean, they can talk to the Mephits if they want to. They could try to talk to the Bullywug guards, but Bullywug guards are in the service at the end, so that's probably not going to go well. It's going to be pretty clear that they're going to try to rob them. I think that we hit all our points. I think the climax, we made sure it's unkillable challenge, so it's very much got a Jack and the Beanstalk, like, oh, we've got to sneak around and hide from the giant as we search for the magic sword. Or whatever sort of magic weapon it is. That's sort of the key item for this adventure. So we had a pretty strong start, right? We're going to find the dead body. That's a pretty good... dead body's a pretty good way to start. And we've got a pretty clear goal because we know that they're going to get the... We've been calling it Fenrir's Tooth, but we don't actually know what the item is. But if we were going to do that right, it's going to be very clear. The stakes are very clear. We're going to get some information from the dead person's corpse. We're going to find out that their head's smashed, so we know that we're going to attacked by a beast. We're going to telegraph a little bit. There's going to be some sort of relatively large, probably a humanoid. Oh, a key for the treasure? I want the treasure. So the way they get the treasure is pretty much by the challenge there is that they need to sneak around the Etten because there's going to be a big giant that's in the location that they do not have a chance of probably beating. I mean, unless they pull some real big shenanigans, but in a toe-to-toe fight, they're not going to be able to fight the Etten. The Etten's going to wipe the floor with them. So the idea is that they will try to sneak around and try to get that. That would be a pretty good strong start too. That head of a dragon crashes into the taverns with a PC sleep. Yeah, I've definitely done some definitely something breaks into the tavern, something breaks into the tavern, or something happens to the town, right? And that's always a good way to kick it off the adventure. We just wanted to do. We were trying out something a little bit different here because I didn't want to take the time to set up a settlement. But I think I'm pretty happy. Idea by Mike Corwell. Yeah. But I'm pretty happy where we got. We needed 5 to 6 scenes. We got that. We know a scene's going to take about 40 minutes for 4 PCs. We've got 5 to 6. We have that 6 that's sort of an optional scene for the most part, and most of these scenes can be kind of pulled out or bolted in as needed because a big part of like running a successful one shot is a lot of time management. It's a lot of being able to watch the clock because you're going to have 3 to 4 hours to run this. And if you start running behind in your times, and actually that's something I haven't done here, but if I knew what time I was going to start and what time I was planning to finish it, I might put time stamps for each of the scenes for when they start. So if I'm paying attention to my watch while I'm playing, if I'm paying attention to the time, and I'm like, oh man, it's like 8:30, and I'm supposed to be starting this next scene at like 8. So I'm about 30 minutes behind, so I need to probably cut a scene. And then I know to cut a scene and just skip ahead. So if I was doing that, I'd be like, all right, we're cutting out the Bullywug scene. They just get straight to the dead treehouse. So we had our adventure hook, the PC motivation for going on the adventure. That's going to be the big magic item that they're going to want to get. It's a location-based adventure. Did we get a cool location? I think the hollowed out tree that's a home of a giant's a pretty cool location in the middle of a bog. I think that's a pretty fun one. I think the fun climax is them sneaking around the very don't wait daddy board game situation. Very classic fairy tale, sneak around the giants because they're a terrible threat. We had our potential ally with the sage, which is somebody who can give us a lot of information about what's going on, so that way they're not necessarily surprised by what happens there. Oh yeah, time management's. I feel like it's probably a thing that we don't talk a lot about as a DM, but it's especially important for one shots because the worst thing I think for probably a one shot is if you don't have enough time to finish up the one shot at the end of a session. And then you're in an awkward space because you don't have enough content to make another full session about. And then you're going to have to organize another session with the group, and maybe the if you're not already like a player group, a cohesive player group that meets and plays all the time, like you need to be able to finish it off in one. And the really good advice is that when you need to, if you're running behind and you need to cut something from the story, is don't start cutting from the end, because you need the climax, you need that resolution for the adventure to for a one shot adventure to keep everything together. Start cutting from where you are now, like from the middle. So that's why I was saying is like if I was in the middle of this adventure and they took forever doing the mud methods or something like that, like I'm gonna cut that third. I'm gonna cut the sage out of everything unless I've already introduced the sage. If I've already introduced the sage, then I'll do this sage scene, but I'm gonna cut out the patrolling Bullywug guards and just have them go straight to the dead treehouse. So, which is maybe that just comes with experience with DM craft, because we didn't really talk about that a lot. Is that other than the first scene and really scene 5, everything else can kind of be cut out of this adventure. Like, hey, you have to find the dead body because that gives you the treasure map and sets you off on the adventure. You have to do the climax, which is getting the goal of the adventure. But everything else is kind of unnecessary, right? We don't really need to do anything with the mud methods. That really doesn't have any bearing on the story other than to provide some sort of challenge. We don't really need to talk to the sage. It's helpful, but we don't need it. We don't really need the patrolling Bullywug guards. We just want to make sure that we have the split of the different types of encounters, right? Whether some exploration, some combats, some social, so they can talk to somebody. Your players needed 2 hours to press a red button in an empty room. Yeah. That's one of the things that I talked to. So I was talking about earlier about wandering monsters and random encounters, and that like anytime that your players get into sort of a circular thing or they're not making any progress, that's when you start throwing. And you don't necessarily have to throw an encounter at them. A lot of times, just the threat of an encounter is good enough. So, like if you, I don't know the situation, but if your players were in a dungeon and it's a room with a red button in it, like, and they're spending all this time, once they start hitting, 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes of going on, and they're not making any progress, they're kind of running in circles about their discussion about it. Then I'm like, oh, you start hearing footsteps coming your way, and you hear talking outside the door. And then, that's going to move them to start doing something because they can't stay there, which is the original intent for Wandering Monsters, which I think has gotten lost over the different editions of D&D. Is that the sort of the basic mechanical intent is to be like, hey, you can't just like hang around in the dungeon. There's a bunch of bad monsters in here, and they don't want you in here. And the longer you hang out around here, the more likely it is that they're going to find you, and you're going to have another fight that you're not prepared for. But that's also from a very old school D&D dungeon idea where it's like you can't camp in the dungeon, right? You can't, like, if you think about it, like if we were thinking like a today's sort of like action movie, you couldn't be like, you can't break into like the terrorist camp or something like that and then go have a nap. Like, how would that work? Like, there's no safe place. Like, you're gonna get found. So the idea is that you need to like keep moving and get to the objective, or you need to get out of there. And so that can be really helpful if you get players that get kind of stuck on stuff, to be like, oh, well, the longer you hang out, the more likely it is you're going to have to do another fight, which is going to take more of your resources, which is going to chip away at your health, take away some extra spells, that sort of thing. And that can get them moving. And honestly, just the threat of doing that will honestly get them to move probably most of the time, unless they felt like that red button was super critical to whatever they were doing. And at that point, this is a good time when you have what they call the instigator archetype of player. Is that instigator players, like if nothing's happening, they'll make something happen, which it sounds like you probably didn't have in your group. But if you did, and I've definitely played with a lot of instigators, if Once that discussion hits about the 5 minute mark and nothing's happened, that instigator player goes over there and they're like, my character goes bonk and presses the button. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I think that's everything that I really wanted to do with this stream. So thank you guys for jumping in, coming along with me. I hope a lot of this information was really useful for you guys. Of course, the VOD is going to be up for you guys that didn't catch all of it, and we'll also be putting this up on YouTube probably next week. But we'll have that there so you can check it out and read all that good stuff. Yeah. Yeah, if you're trying to psych out people with a trap, yeah, that'll do it. Putting a red button in an empty room will do it. But at the end of the day, here's what's going to happen: they're going to push that button. It's just how much time are you going to screw around until you push the button? Because if you give players a button to push, they're going to push the button eventually. So, but yeah, like I said, that's everything I wanted to do here. Obviously, we're doing the streams on Sunday. If you guys can come catch that out, we're doing the solo RPG run through with Leah. Things went very awry last time, not in the direction I was planning. So we're gonna have to figure out what's going on with that wormling, that dragon wormling, and Omer's, gotten us into a little bit of a situation again. We're gonna have to figure that out. We're still no closer to getting to Riverside Conservatory. We've got to figure out what's going on with the gas. Why does it want to eat specifically a dragon wormling? Does that have anything to do with the slaver's affliction? Is that passed by some sort of intimate contact, some sort of sexually transmission? Is it turning people into undead? We don't know. We're going to have to figure that out. If you come along with us on Sundays and watch the videos on YouTube or the VODs later, you'll find out as I find out. Well, or maybe a week later I find out, but still, you'll find out as I'm finding out. You'll see me find out. Obviously, you can check out the blog. I have a blog post that's almost finished. I just need to lay in some graphics and do some final touches on that. So hopefully that should be up this weekend. Been working on it for a while. When we're talking about overland travel in D&D and medieval / Renaissance and more sort of anachronistic travel, which can be really fun. So if you want to check that out, and you want to learn how to make your game's overland travel seem maybe a little bit more realistic. Maybe you don't care about that, but if you do, and I like that stuff in my game, then I think you'll find that a really interesting article. Of course, follow me here on Twitch, or follow me over on Twitter, or, as I prefer, do both. Maybe even subscribe to the YouTube channel. I don't know. Get crazy. But thanks for coming along with me, guys. I think that's everything I want to go over. Talk to everything I needed to talk. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you on the next one, man. Have a good night, or good day, or wherever you are, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.